She is a heroine to some. As a fighter for black rights, she is a villain to others who believe she hides her crimes behind revolutionary rhetoric. Back in the 1970s, Assata Shakur was known as the soul of the self-styled Black Liberation Army, an armed group implicated in the killings of several police officers. In New Jersey, Governor Whitman has posted a $50,000 reward for her capture. Meet her now in Cuba. As she walks through Havana streets, she is just another shopper. She passes almost unnoticed by Cubans. Her name is Assata Shakur. In the United States, she is known by the police and FBI as Joanne Chesimard, one of the nation's most wanted fugitives. Wanted for what police describe as the cold-blooded execution of a New Jersey state trooper back in the 70s. She denies it and says of the state cops,
they want to just kill me. They want to see me dead.
Chesimard was convicted in the killing of Trooper Werner Foster and the wounding of another trooper in a furious shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike in East Brunswick. That's where Chesimard was wounded, and one of two men in the car with her was killed. The other later captured. Police say that after Trooper Forrester was shot down, his own gun was ripped from his holster and 2 bullets were fired into his brain. After her capture in that deadly shootout, she was sentenced to life in prison. In 1979, with the help of 3 armed men, she broke out of the women's prison in Clinton, New Jersey.
She made her break this afternoon from the prison in Clinton, New Jersey, and lawmen once called her the soul of the Black Liberation Army.
Chesimard went underground and then surfaced in the 1980s in Cuba under Fidel Castro's protection. Now, at 50 and a grandmother, she agreed to talk with me in Havana. Chesimard, or Assata Shakur, insisted she had killed no one and was railroaded by an all-white jury and by what she called racist New Jersey state troopers.
Did you shoot Werner Foster?
No, I did not. I was shot with my arms in the air, then shot again in the back, and then left on the ground to die.
That is absolutely false. Our investigation shows that Joanne Chesimard initiated the conflict. She reached into her pocketbook, pulled out a 9mm weapon, and started firing at Trooper Harper.
Were you holding a weapon?
No, I was not. No.
Well, after almost 25 years, the roadway area has changed somewhat, but this is the spot where the shooting occurred. Joanne Chesimard was in the front seat on the passenger side. The driver of the car and Trooper Forrester were in the back of the car. It was after midnight, and shots rang out.
Harper, who was the other police
Correct.
That was at the scene,
other trooper,
started to shoot. And, you know, after that, everything is like foggy. It was horrible. It was like a prolonged version of hell. You know, I felt like, you know, everything was moving around. My chest started to explode. My head started to explode. And the next thing I knew, you know, they were coming by me and saying, is she dead yet? Is she dead yet? And I was later taken to a hospital, and I was beaten. I was tortured.
I think that, you know, as so happens so often with the criminal element, they have a tendency to turn things around, and they become the victim. We got to remember that, number one, there's a trooper who is dead.
And why did Assata Shakur escape from prison using hostages as a shield instead of appealing her case to higher courts?
I never received justice, and I escaped, A, because I was afraid for my life, and B, because I knew that I would never receive justice.
As to Chesimard's claim that she was left on the ground to die, Colonel Williams told me she and her Confederate actually sped away in their car 5 miles down the turnpike before she was finally captured, and that it was Trooper Forrester who was left on the ground to die. The Clinton, New Jersey prison from which Chesimard escaped has been rebuilt with much tighter security. You're going to see 2 messages tonight to Joanne Chesimard. One from the widow of the New Jersey state trooper Chesimard was convicted of killing some 20 years ago, a murder Chesimard denies. The other message is from the New Jersey State Police. And in my exclusive interview with her, Chesimard expressed her fears of what the troopers just might do.
I'm afraid that they might assassinate me. They might try to kidnap me.
Joanne Chesimard, who calls herself Assata Shakur, talking to me in Havana, Cuba. talking of her fears that the New Jersey State Police will somehow find a way to get to her.
These people will stop at nothing.
In 1979, Shakur escaped from a New Jersey prison where she was serving life for the murder of State Trooper Werner Forrester. Police said he was executed with his own gun.
It was such an unfair trial, by an all-white jury.
Joanne Chesimard is the #1 fugitive for the New Jersey State Police.
The head of the state police intently watched a tape of my interview with the convicted cop killer as she claimed state troopers tortured her in the hospital.
You know, they would stick their hands in the wounds. Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here?
It's been almost 25 years, and I'm sure that she's replayed this and turned it around to her benefit many, many times.
Shakur portrayed herself as a fighter for racial justice by what she called armed struggle if necessary.
People have the right to free themselves from oppression by whatever means they deem possible.
She is not a heroine. She's a murderer.
Colonel Williams called Shakur's fears of police assassination ludicrous, but then he gave me this startling comment.
We would do everything we could to get her off the island of Cuba, and if that includes kidnapping, we would do it.
Colonel Williams told me the police determination to recapture Chesimard is fired by the memory of Trooper Forrester on the memorial wall.
She killed my husband.
Rose Forrester, the trooper's widow. Their son was just 3.5 years old when her husband was gunned down.
My son lost his dad. He grew up without a dad. You know, he never saw his son going to school. The first soccer game, taking him fishing. And then he got married 1.5 years ago. He never saw him get married. And I think my son really missed to have a dad.
I say to her that I am totally sorry that her husband was killed. I did not kill him.
She is sorry? I doubt it that she is sorry. No. I think they knew that what they were doing that night.
Anyone who suffers a loss is in great pain, and I hope that she understands my pain as well.
She don't know what suffering is.
As for Colonel Williams' statement to me that he was prepared to kidnap Joanne Chesimard from Cuba, later in the interview he said that only lawful actions would be taken, but he didn't elaborate. The top state police official added that even now, almost 2 decades after her prison escape, he has a detective working full-time on the Chesimard case. Williams told me, and I'm quoting, "Chesimard better be looking over her shoulder all the time."
Black brother, black sisters, I'm going to tell you, the worthless Negro from Virginia, a.k.a. the Black O.J. Simpson, I look over my shoulder all the time. I'll tell you what else. Sonia Massey had better have looked over her shoulder. Tamir Rice, Michael Brown Jr., Eric Garner, if you are a victim of white supremacy racism, you better look over your shoulder, neck, ear, back, front. Target is all over your being. So you had better have your head on a swivel, whether you are accused of killing a cop or not. That is the problem. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Today's date, Friday, November 14, 2025. So I have been told this is our 6th installment on Evelyn Williams Inadmissible Evidence, the story of the African-American trial lawyer who defended the Black Liberation Army. We are picking up on Chapter 17, the audio segment that we heard at the beginning. That is from 1998, so slightly less than a decade after Assata Shakur escaped from prison in New Jersey. That was NBC News. And they did a multi-part, I guess, interview focus segment on Assata, and even went down to Cuba to speak with her specifically. It stuck out when, at least to me, a few of the things that stuck out for that segment. COINTELPRO had a media operation as well. This may be a part of that. I'd have to go back and even look at the context of when this was being reported in 1998, but neither here nor there. They talked with some of the enforcement officials, white, and they, gave their standard, we got this no-count cop killer, and she's lying, she's not a hero, and which is a lot of the same rhetoric that has been stated over the past, 45 days or so since Assata Shakur passed away this year, and people saying the same thing, and even some people have gotten in trouble because they have just recognized her passing and said, what are you doing, honoring this cop killer, and she was convicted, and this is a disgrace, and same type of thing. Anyway, but Colonel Williams, white man, where he said that, her concerns that she might be killed by the police are ludicrous, even though we might be willing to kidnap her. Like, to what? Wait a minute. Like, one, the police enforcement officers do kill a lot of dark people, especially once you are accused of killing a police officer, much less convicted. Two, if you're willing to COINTELPRO kidnap her, man, who is to say? Whoops, in the kidnapping, oh man, she got rebellious, and we had to nigger knock her a few times and she didn't make it. Whoops. Come on. They said that they had a full-time detective who was working on this case, just, I guess, explicitly for Assata Shakur. Man, if you want an illustration of white welfare, oh my goodness. Like, what? Like, this is, so like I said, this is like a decade after she has escaped. So you have a white person, I can't imagine them having like Ras Baraka's like cousin or nephew working this case in New Jersey. So you got a white person who is specifically assigned to this case, nothing else, and they just get like a full-time job, salary, benefits, pension, all that good stuff, to focus on this Negra who escaped like 20 years ago. White welfare. And like, how long did they get that job specific? That obviously they flunked, because yeah, she was never extradited. They never had a successful kidnapping. So what exactly did you accomplish and like I said, how long did this person have this job until she passed away? Like, did this get passed off? Like, you worked the Assata case for 10 years and just keep newspaper clippings and interviews and that, so that maybe you get to go to Cuba and see if you could talk to people. Like, white welfare. Incidentally, I would say that is real COINTELPRO as well, where you can have a whole staff of people just to study one Negra. That is what domination looks like. And they did say that they tightened up the code at the New Jersey penitentiary where she escaped. That is what white people do. Refine. That's it. We will get to it. Chapter 17, Inadmissible Evidence. Evelyn Williams, Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy.
But tonight we get even.
Part 3. Chapter 17. My first reaction of disbelief mingled with a sustained hot flash of exultation when I heard the news. How was it possible for anyone to escape from South Hall, the maximum security unit of Clinton Correctional Institution for Women, isolated from the other buildings in the 500-acre complex and surrounded by a 15-foot chain link fence topped with 2 feet of barbed wire? I reconstructed my many visits there and visualized the locked gates separating the grounds from the long, winding road in from the highway. The checkpoint registration shed where identifications were compared with lists of approved visitors and where one's person and possessions were searched. The armed guards who drove the prison van from the checkpoint to South Hall. The first electronically operated door the accompanying guard directed be opened. The first room entered, separated from the visiting room by another electronically operated door. The visitor's room where, behind a large, completely enclosed bulletproof bubble, the guard who operated all of the electrical equipment was stationed. The steel door located behind the guard facing the entrance to the area from which the inmates entered the room. I repeated to myself, how was it possible? And I could find no more answers than the New Jersey corrections officials could. I didn't leave my house for the next week except to go to the store for the daily papers, which gave only sketchy accounts of what I was amused to read they called Assata's liberation. The November 4th New York Times reported the official version of the escape as provided by James V. Stable, a spokesperson for the Department of Corrections. One man arrived first and checked through the registration building. He was not searched. He carried 2 handguns, apparently .45 caliber. He was driven in the van to South Hall by a guard, who then escorted him through the chain link fence and the main door. Then he was ushered through another locked metal door that opens into the visiting room. That door is operated electronically by a guard in a glass booth. Shortly afterwards, the 2 other men arrived at the main gate, cleared the registration building, again without being searched, and were driven to South Hall by the same guard who had escorted the first visitor. He took the 2 men through the fence's locked gate. Upon reaching the metal door, one of the 2 men drew a pistol and seized the man who was escorting them. Simultaneously, the man who had been talking with Miss Chesimard came up to the glass booth, drew 2 pistols and pointed them at the woman on guard there. She complied with an order to open the metal door. Miss Chesimard and the 3 men took the 2 guards as hostages. Miss Chesimard, a Muslim who also goes by the name of Assata Shakur, and the 3 men transferred to 2 cars after driving the commandeered van across a hilly field. The field separates the grounds of the prison and a nearby state school for the mentally retarded. The getaway cars have been in the school parking lot. The Newark, New Jersey Star-Ledger gave a slightly different version of Stable's remarks. The paper reported that when the 2 men entered the prison with the male guard driving the van, Chesimard and her first visitor had their guns trained on a female guard in a bulletproof control booth. Although the guard was supposed to have remained in the booth, which operates the unit's doors, she came out when ordered to. Chesimard and the others handcuffed the guards and herded them into the jail van for a ride to a parking lot at an adjacent school. There they piled into 2 cars, a blue Lincoln and a blue compact car, either a Comet or a Maverick. Chesimard got into the smaller car, which bore New Jersey license plates. The guards were left in the van unharmed. On November 3rd, the FBI issued a warrant for Assata on charges of illegal flight after it was assumed she had left the state of New Jersey, eluding helicopters, roadblocks leading to bridges and tunnels, airports, bus terminals, and other non-vehicular routes of travel. A white woman in her early 20s was believed to have been the driver of one of the cars, and sketches of her and the 3 black men based on the descriptions provided by the guards were published, along with the names the men had used: Dingus Abidal, Quelly Olugbala, and Jerry Patterson. Officials admitted that the names were most likely fictitious and that the addresses they had on file for them proved to be vacant lots or non-existent, adding that they were nevertheless positive the men were members of the Black Liberation Army. Criticism of the inadequate security at the prison mounted, investigations were demanded, and state prison officials considered reorganizing security to include tank traps of the Normandy beachhead type. The Star-Ledger's editorial proclaimed, Joanne Chesimard's escape from the Clinton reformatory is more than an embarrassment. It's a disgrace. Corrections Commissioner William Fowler glumly remarked, "I'm not sure we're going to make any changes. I'm not sure any changes could stop something like that escape." According to the Courier News, a central New Jersey paper, police said, "No shots were fired and no one was injured in the escape," which went so smoothly and quietly that other corrections officers inside the maximum security building said they were not aware of any problem until the alarm was sounded. And state police and prison authorities called the escape well planned and arranged, with obvious knowledge of the area. Clinton Pagano, state police superintendent, predicted, "We will recapture Joanne Chesimard and return her to the place of rescue, whatever effort that takes. You can take that to the bank." I searched my memory for a scintilla of indication that Assata had been planning to escape. I suppose I was given a clue to her ultimate intentions during the week in the spring of 1979 when she was returned from Alderson to Yardville to aid in the preparation of her appeal. I remember what she said when she put on a necklace I had given both her and Kakuya with a subway token as a pendant. "You can never tell. I just might need this one day." And again, I might have sensed a hint on my last visit to her at Clinton 2 weeks before November 2nd. Usually, I notified the prison of the date of my visit and called the local cab company to wait for me at the station since there was no bus to the prison. On this day, no cab was waiting, and when I called the company's office, I could get no information about either why a cab was not there or when one would be available. The train station was a considerable distance from the jail, and I almost decided to return to New York. I was tired from working on the appeal, and I estimated that by the time I walked to the prison, half the visiting time would have expired. But for whatever reason, I was determined to see Assata. The sun was hot and my briefcase heavy, and by the time I had climbed the hill leading from the highway to the checkpoint, I was exhausted. Perspiring but pleased at my endurance, I watched Assata come through the sliding doors and greet me indifferently, barely giving me a glance. I wondered what was wrong and didn't open my briefcase as I usually did. And the visit, the last time I was to see her for 5 years, was almost a disaster as I fought to control my anger. I noticed that during our entire conversation, she was strangely preoccupied, talking to me while she looked through the glass partition to the small room on the other side where the soda machines were. We had spent many times together, especially in Middlesex County Jail, really saying little, communicating with each other in acquiescent silence. But this was preoccupation, not reflection. She was alert, making purposeful observations, looking at the inner door to the main dormitory behind the bubble, watching each time the door opened to let in or out a messenger or another corrections officer. I opened my briefcase finally and spread out the notes I had made for her on the progress of the appeal, but she never looked at them. I knew that she believed her food was being poisoned, and I had promised to try to conduct an investigation to determine the source. Was she impatient because I had no results to report? I also knew that she had been working as a case aide, a social service position in which she helped inmates with their problems, and sometimes she had asked me to provide minor services for them that they weren't able to do themselves. Was there an overwhelming problem that was bothering her? While Assata was always gracious and pleasant to visitors who came to see her, whether at Alderson or Rikers or Clinton, genuinely pleased and humbled that they would suffer the searches and other personal annoyances necessary to talk to her for an hour or so, she rarely hesitated to communicate her dissatisfactions, pain, or apprehensions to me. I was at least pleased that she had been on a daily exercise regimen and looked fit and healthy. So I waited for what I believed to be a deeply despondent mood to change. As I reflect now, she was absorbed in measured calculations during the only opportunity she had for them, visiting time. But I should have suspected something when she suddenly held up her arms and put them around me and, just before I embraced her, let large tears fill her eyes and spill silently down her face. Not ever, in the 6 years of prison, had she cried in my presence. Not even once. We held each other for a long time before the guard told me I had to leave. I was deeply troubled, unable to explain it, and not aware that the tears were caused by her anticipation of a very long separation from her child and her family, or in anticipation of her death while attempting to escape. I blessed each day of her freedom and prepared myself for her death if she were captured. But death outside of prison walls somehow was bearable. Assata had repeatedly told C.O.W.S that one day she would be free and that the first thing she would do would be to come to her. So each time the telephone rang or a knock sounded on the door, C.O.W.S, then 5, knew it must be her mother. She flew to the door to answer it, wriggling away from Doris's grasp. She positioned herself near the telephone to grab it before Doris when it rang. And she rejected all of the reasons we gave her that her mother was now in danger and would not expose her to it by coming to the house. As far as C.O.W.S was concerned, Mommy Assata would come. She had promised. Except for 2 occasions at Christmas, Assata had seen C.O.W.S only through a glass partition that separated inmates from visitors on Rikers Island. The visits at Middlesex County Jail were held in a room on the first floor that was too small for any activity except for Assata to hold C.O.W.S on her lap, sing freedom songs to her that she had composed, and play impromptu games. C.O.W.S was always impatient during the wait to see her mother and would crawl across the cement floor to the head of the circular staircase, peering down, angry, bewildered, and squealing in anticipation of her mother's emergence at the bottom of the staircase. From the beginning, C.O.W.S had recognized the special meaning of this person, and her gurgles of attempted communication changed to long child-adult conversations during the daily phone calls Assata made during her second stay at Rikers from June 1977 to May 1978. She also knew that the beautiful, brightly colored blankets that covered her bed in her doll's bed, as well as the many dresses and coats she wore, were knitted for her by her mother. Assata's paintings and handmade birthday cards decorated C.O.W.S room, and a pillowcase on which Assata had embroidered the words "Breakdy Chains" was never moved from its special place on her bed. The week immediately following Assata's escape was a reign of terror for Doris. First, she didn't believe that Assata had really escaped because her assessment was that it was impossible. She theorized that the FBI or some other police agency had murdered Assata and had publicized the escape as a cover-up. Almost destroyed by this theory, she was not prepared for the actions of the terrorism fugitive squad of the FBI, which began the day after the escape and continued over the next week. On November 3rd, members of the squad filled the corridor of her apartment, heavily armed, and pounded on her door with such force that Eddie Johnson, her second husband, fearing a break-in, opened it and told them that Doris was too upset at the news of her daughter's escape to talk to them. He told them to contact me, her lawyer, to arrange an appointment. They returned several hours later, yelling over gunpoint blows to the door. "Open up, FBI." This time the door was not open. Doris told them she would talk to them only in my presence. I was at home, glued to the radio and in constant telephone contact with her, but they never called me. The next morning at 7:45, they returned. Through the peephole, Doris could see the black mass of bodies crowding the hallway. She repeated her insistence that her lawyer be present, and they told her they had no intention of calling me and demanded she open the door at once. Eddie had gone to work and she had been dressing C.O.W.S for nursery school, but she hesitated for only a moment before she refused to open the door. Surprisingly, they left and there was quiet for the next few days. But on November 8th, they attempted another tactic. They came to the school where she taught and spoke to the principal, who called her out of the classroom to tell her the FBI was there and would not leave until she talked to them. It was open school week and the parents present in her classroom buzzed about the drama unfolding. The new battleground was particularly disturbing because danger was now manifesting itself everywhere, even stalking her on her job in the presence of her students and their parents. Not satisfied with her refusal to see them in the school, the FBI agents came back to her house at about 5:00 p.m. and repeated the thunderous banging on her door, threatening to enter by force. Unsuccessful, they telephoned her throughout the night until, recognizing their voices, she hung up the phone and eventually took it off the hook. On November 13, 1979, I filed an action in federal court against William H. Webster, director of the FBI, for a preliminary and permanent injunction prohibiting the FBI from attempting to talk to Doris without the presence of her lawyer from mail and telephone surveillance, and from maintaining electronic surveillance in and around her apartment. An affidavit attached to the Assistant U.S. Attorney's opposition to my action, sworn to by Thomas Bernard Locke, the Manhattan Supervisory Special Agent for the FBI, stated that a federal warrant was issued for Assata's arrest on November 3rd and further. It is standard investigative procedure in fugitive cases for agents to communicate with the immediate family as soon as possible. Such communication had the following aims: 1, to solicit the family's cooperation in the investigation, if possible, and to obtain any relevant information which they possess, and 2, to impress upon them that the FBI wishes to apprehend the fugitive in question without violence and without causing harm to the fugitive or to anyone else. This latter purpose was especially important with respect to Miss Chesimard, since on the basis of her previous record and her escape, it appears likely that she would offer armed resistance to any attempt to recapture her. We thus wanted to advise Mrs. Johnson that while we were intent on apprehending Joanne, we wanted her unharmed and wished to avoid any shootout or other violence. We also believed that it was important to communicate this message directly to Mrs. Johnson. While Locke admitted that the FBI had come to Doris's house, he denied any surveillance at all. On April 15, 1980, Charles E. Stewart, Jr., the district court judge, denied injunctive relief and dismissed the complaint. But no further efforts to see Doris or to talk to her on the telephone were made after the action was filed. I appealed the decision, however, and during a pre-argument conference scheduled by the Court of Appeals, Second Circuit, on May 19, 1980, one agreed to withdraw my appeal if the FBI assured me that there would be no further efforts to contact Doris. While I received no direct promise from the FBI, I entered into a stipulation that inferred that an agreement had been reached. The appeal was withdrawn with permission to reinstate it by June 15, 1981, if within that time further harassment occurred. Also, Doris, who had suffered a cardiac infarction in December 1979, forcing her to retire from her job, simply wanted an end to the overt intimidation and threats. But the search of the Joint Terrorist Task Force, the team of FBI agents and state and local police organized to apprehend Assata, continued to be terroristic, illegal, brutal, and in total disregard of innocent lives. On November 9, 1979, Ronald Boyd Hill, a former Black Panther and a friend of Assata's who had visited her at Clinton, was arrested in his Brooklyn home by 40 flak-jacketed New Jersey, New York, and FBI gunmen who stormed his apartment. Claiming that the Clinton Corrections Guards had positively identified him as having aided in the escape. Newspaper headlines heralded the capture, and State Police Superintendent Pagano beamed in satisfaction, promising more arrests. $1 million bail was set. The only problem was that Ron, married with 4 children, was enrolling one of the children at a daycare center in Brooklyn at the time of the escape. A fact testified to by several witnesses and certified by the parking ticket issued to him at the time of the escape. Judge Eve Preminger of the New York Supreme Court reduced his bail to $2,500 on November 29th following a hearing, and on February 24th, 1980, all charges against him were dismissed. A few days after Assata's escape, a white policeman attempted to arrest 4 Black University of Maryland students in Asbury Park, New Jersey. The officer, who suspected that one of the students was Assata, fired a shot into the air and was quickly surrounded by a jeering crowd that forced him to admit his mistake and retreat to his precinct. In the early morning hours of April 19, 1980, the Joint Terrorist Task Force cordoned off 4 blocks of Morningside Avenue in Harlem, and a 50-man army crashed through building number 92. They showed no warrants, despite the April 1980 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that police must have a warrant before entering a suspect's home to make a routine arrest. They broke down doors and held women and children hostage as, brandishing shotguns and machine guns, they questioned them about Assata's whereabouts. The police searched apartments, ripped open drawers and closets too small to conceal anyone, and destroyed property in the process. Eben Adelona, who had 2 degrees in nursing and was a doctoral candidate in anthropology at Columbia University, was asleep with her 5-year-old daughter when the agents burst into her apartment, forced her into the hallway, and ordered her to raise her nightgown so that they could search for gunshot wounds, under the impression that she was Assata. Others terrorized that night included a high school student, a teacher, and a television producer. Harlem Congressional Representative Charles Rangel demanded a full investigation by Attorney General Benjamin C. Valetti and FBI Director William Webster. Neil H. Welch, head of the New York FBI office, resigned on May 5th with 2 years remaining before his mandatory retirement, but he denied that his resignation was connected to the 90 Morningside raid. The tenants brought a federal civil action against the FBI through their attorneys, NCBL, and the New York Civil Liberties Union. In the summer of 1980, a task force of FBI agents and New Jersey state troopers staked out various locations in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, where the residents are primarily black, in the search for Assata. The prime target was the community center and Uhuru Sasa Freedom Now School, founded in 1975 by Jidu Wusi, chief of operations for the Black United Front and longtime community activist. Pagano said that the New Jersey officials were reasonably certain that Assata was hiding in the school but called off the raid because they were afraid it would spark a riot. That is a very volatile area. He said, if we were wrong, or if something untoward happened, we could have stimulated a community incident. We were afraid of creating more of a problem than we would have solved by capturing her. Community leaders denied that Assata was ever in Bedford-Stuyvesant, but said they would not have turned her in even if they had seen her. Wusi said, we feel she was tried unfairly and we believe she is innocent. A pregnant Fulani Sunni Ali's Mississippi house was raided in Gestapo-like violence by hundreds of FBI as she lay sleeping with her small children. Her musician husband, Bilal Sunni Ali, was later charged with aiding in Assata's escape in a federal indictment and was acquitted. On April 14, 1981, 2 policemen, John Scarangella and Richard Rainey, stopped a van allegedly for a routine license plate check in Stede, Albans, Queens. A shootout ensued during which Scarangella was killed and Rainey wounded. It was reported that the gunman escaped in a car driven by Assata. A week later, newspapers quoted police department officials' opinion that the gunmen were members of the BLA because 9mm automatic weapons, a BLA trademark, had been used, and because fingerprints found on the abandoned van were those of known members of the BLA. It was further reported that the gunmen are believed to have opened fire to prevent capture of Joanne Chesimard, the so-called soul of the BLA, who had vowed she will never be taken alive. Police suspect that she was being carried from one hideout to another in the white van when it was stopped for a license check by the 2 policemen. Several days after this pronouncement, Chief of Detectives James Sullivan admitted, we have no evidence that they were in any way her bodyguards or that she was in the van during the shooting. Abdul Majid Anthony Laborde, a member of the Black Panther Party and a paralegal worker, was arrested in Philadelphia in January 1982 and indicted for the shootings, charged with Assata's escape and with committing an October 1981 Brinks armored car robbery in Rockland County. Bashir Haim James Dixon York, a former member of the Black Panther Party, was arrested for the shootings in August 1981 in South Carolina. Both were allegedly identified through eyewitness reports. Bill Kunstler and C. Vernon Mason represented them at their trials, the first 2 of which ended in hung juries. At the 3rd trial, the district attorney suddenly uncovered several witnesses who testified that sometime after the 2nd trial, both men had confessed their participation in the crimes to them. The 2 were convicted and sentenced to 30 years to life without parole. An appeal is pending, and in spite of the police-inspired media accusations that Majid had aided in Assata's liberation and was involved in the Brinks robbery, he was never indicted for either. On October 23, 1981, Sekou Odinga Nathaniel Burns and Matiari Shabaka Sundiata Samuel Smith, both former Black Panthers, were arrested in Queens while traveling in a van the police claimed was involved in drug transactions. As they approached the van, the police opened fire, killed Matiari, and arrested Sekou, who they believed was responsible for Assata's escape. He was taken to the precinct where, in an effort to force information from him concerning Assata's whereabouts, they tore his nails off and repeatedly shoved his head into a toilet bowl full of urine. When he still refused to talk, they kicked him with such force that his pancreas had to be removed. He was indicted for the Rockland County Brinks robbery, but the indictment was dismissed when a federal grand jury in New York filed a RICO conspiracy indictment against him and Sylvia Beraldini, a member of the May 19th organization, charging them with a cornucopia of crimes, including aiding in Assata's escape. Footnote: the RICO statute, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act, enacted in 1976, 18 U.S.C., Section 1962. A law originally passed to address organized crime influence in the labor field has also been turned against political activists and their organizations. The law has now been applied to designate as criminal enterprises organizations with political aims and to try members of such groups under broad conspiracy rules which allow for up to 40 years in prison. International Review of Contemporary Law, 1990, page 121. In footnote, both were found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison on each count with a recommendation of no parole. While members of the Black Panther Party and other militant organizations were special targets, many other individuals and families were attacked, but this harassment was rarely reported in the media. In response to this massive, government-sponsored effort to intimidate the larger Black community into terrified rejection of Assata, posters were plastered on every available outdoor space in Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant in New Jersey and in other areas throughout the country, declaring in bold letters, "Assata is welcome here." And Mae Jackson, a longtime Brooklyn community activist, along with others, paid for a half-page ad in the African-American New York weekly, The Amsterdam News, proclaiming support for Assata and urging her to stay strong and stay free. It was entitled, "Run, Assata, Run," reflecting the famous slave song for those who had escaped. Chapter 18. Unsubstantiated rumors were my only hint of Assata's whereabouts. Hours merged into days. Days became months. And by April 1980, when Assata still remained free, the legal and emotional stringencies that had consumed me for the last 7 years were replaced by a restless calm. Doris, Kakuya, and I visited my parents in North Carolina, and we reminisced about the past and wondered about the future as we sat on the isolated privacy of Freeman's Beach, the sound of the waves insulating our words. Our stubborn hope resisted the reports of Assata's imminent capture and eased the underlying anxiety our brave words offered each other. Biwai had given birth to Donnie in December 1974 and was now living in Doris's building, providing Doris with the comfort of another grandchild and adding a companion to Kakuya's small world. In January 1980, the family size was again increased when Biwai had another child, Brad. I needed to work, but I was undecided about what I wanted to do. Unlike my sister and the rest of my family, I have always been a maverick. Neither money nor economic security had ever seemed a legitimate goal or anything that summoned my passions. I lived simply, and except for the repayment of debts I had accumulated in recent years, salary was not a real consideration. I wanted a job that was both challenging and satisfying. Strangely enough, I did not factor my age into my future. I was now 57, but I was healthy and had an excess of energy. I still played a good game of tennis, and only on occasion did my legs cramp during long swims. I had leaped over middle age without a thought that time was running out for me or that there wasn't enough time left to choose a new direction. I had impatiently dismissed the interminable inconvenience of menopause, and other people's concerns about being old were never mine. It wasn't that I was unmindful of the wrinkles in my face, the sagging skin, or the unfamiliar reflection that confronted me in store windows. It was just that I was never in the tomorrow syndrome. Today was not a bridge to tomorrow. Today was to be lived today. And tomorrow was to be lived tomorrow if reached. Yesterdays were storehouses of time well spent and never to be regretted. One day in April 1980, as I looked through the New York Law Journal employment section, I saw an opening for Executive Director of Harlem Legal Services and mailed in my resume. I had no real hope of being hired, considering the political favoritism that permeates all small communities, especially when opportunities are few, and I had never been a part of Harlem politics. I was shocked when, after several interviews with the board of directors and staff attorneys, I was appointed, and I began the job in June 1980 with the zeal of a crusader. There was no question in my mind that the agency needed to be completely overhauled, from the evening janitor to the supervisory staff. And I met this new challenge with enthusiasm and a brisk broom, stunning the entire staff. For 7 months prior to my appointment, there had been no executive director, and the result had been confusion and disorganization. Harlem Legal Services was one of 8 delegate corporations throughout the city under the umbrella of Community Action for Legal Service, Inc. C.O.W.S, a not-for-profit corporation organized under the judiciary law of the state of New York and funded by Legal Services Corporation, created pursuant to the Federal Legal Services Corporation Act and ultimately subject to its jurisdiction. Our budget was only $573,660, the smallest allocated to any of the delegate corporations, despite the fact that the needy population in Harlem was the largest. The staff consisted of 1 director of litigation, 7 attorneys, 1 unlicensed VISTA attorney, 1 administrative assistant, 3 administrative secretaries, 1 bilingual secretary, 2 intake officers, 3 paralegals in the government benefit unit, 2 tenant organizers, a receptionist, and 2 investigators. The guidelines established by the Legal Services Act narrowly limited the areas in which legal representation could be extended to the poor. Only civil cases were allowed, and the most common cases involved evictions, consumer fraud, and appearances before administrative agencies for grievances concerning the denial of welfare, Social Security, unemployment benefits, or Medicaid. There were also a few cases in family court relating to custody proceedings and a very few job discrimination and civil rights actions. The agency had never undertaken major civil litigation or federal class action suits, although its mere presence in Harlem was a mandate for such an effort. I streamlined procedures to enable the attorneys to respond more substantively to eviction notices and prepared forms to be filled in by the intake workers so we could file affirmative defenses and counterclaims of housing code violations, rodent infestation, unmade repairs, and other violations, and could force the city to make building inspections and the court to hold trials before evictions could be carried out. But my primary focus was to create an excellent legal resource for Harlem that was visible, dependable, and accessible. With other staff members who shared my commitments, I began voluntary outreach programs. We supported the struggle to prevent the closing of Sydenham Hospital, and I represented Harlem Legal Services on the board of Harlem Health Services Research and Development Corporation, established to operate a full-service acute care health facility after Sydenham was closed. We sponsored, together with various community organizations spearheaded by the Milbank Frawley People's Council, a 1-day educational conference with community participation. We joined the Abyssinian Baptist Church and Mount Zion AME Church in a joint effort to remedy the sparsity of preschool educational centers. We organized massive drives with the Regional Director of Legal Services Corporation to prevent the threatened defunding of the agency, and joined forces with the Community Law Office and the National Conference of Black Lawyers to bring a class action suit challenging the forced relocation of long-term occupants of buildings. earmarked by private sponsors for destruction in the name of rehabilitation. We also held a monthly operation with community organizations to distribute to residents information concerning legal problems. I had become increasingly concerned about the erosion of the housing stock in Harlem, the arson-forced abandonment of apartment houses that now stood empty at the corners and down the side streets of beautiful boulevards, windowless and blackened, looking down on the growing number of families forced to leave them. I became convinced that the pattern of destruction was not accidental and began searching the records in City Hall, the City Planning Board, and the Board of Estimate to try to trace the reasons for the city's inertia in rebuilding Harlem, despite the rapid rise of rehabilitated areas elsewhere. In the process, I uncovered the first urban renewal development plan the city had projected in 1956 for the St. Nicholas Avenue section of Harlem but had never implemented. City-owned properties acquired by tax foreclosure outnumbered the remaining 35,000 buildings that were also in tax default, but, pursuant to Mayor Edward I. Koch's plan for Harlem, were not taken over by the city. More than coincidence accounted for the locations and unoccupied status of the buildings the city did own. They were on the corners of the avenues in Harlem, and the buildings adjacent to them formed a solid block of development potential. The families who had been living in them had been forced out either by arson fires or by city proclamations declaring them unsafe. Although the buildings were vacant and non-revenue producing, the administration refused to sell them to interested Harlem residents. When the city was finally pressured into making some available, 11 brownstones were selected, and the sale was by lottery and offered citywide. Tax defaults on occupied buildings abandoned by private owners but scattered throughout Harlem on unplanned rehabilitation sites were ignored along with the housing code violations that riddled them. Koch's deputy mayor, Nathan Leventhal, admitted that the administration had intentionally cut back on the number of properties it took over to save the cost of maintaining them. What he did not admit was that the situational violence inflicted by Koch's policies on the families remaining in those buildings was designed to accelerate the vacancy rate. In 1979, New York Governor Hugh Carey started the decline of services to the city by cutting $3 million of the state contribution to the city's code enforcement program, which handles building complaints. By the start of the winter of 1980, the number of employees in the city's code compliance units had declined from 1,100 in 1975 to 820, and the number of building inspectors had been reduced from 625 to 382. Simultaneously, the city halved its budget for emergency fuel and boiler repairs from $15 million to $1 million, leaving those tenants still living in the privately owned buildings that had been abandoned by landlords without fuel, repairs, or other services, trapped in a remediless squeeze. The tragic consequences of Koch's policies to human life in the event of a cold winter were predicted by the community-based task force on city-owned property in the summer of 1980. When the coldest weather of the century hit New York in December 1980, the Village Voice reported, "The fact is that Koch prepared for this winter by turning off the valves on the city's radiators, continuing the decimation of programs designed to keep the people warm. Koch's policies set the stage for the disasters that followed the sub-zero temperatures that gripped the city from the last week in December 1980 to the third week in January 1981. The families living in buildings abandoned by owners to whom they continued to pay rent were devastated. The majority had small children and were employed. Horror story after horror story filled the pages of the daily newspapers. The buildings were without heat. Water froze in pipes in the few buildings that had water at all. It was a common sight to see people opening fire hydrants and lifting pails of water up to their apartments. There were fires from defective kerosene and oil heaters. And when people were discovered frozen to death in their apartments, Koch declared that a crisis existed. He offered two solutions to the families. One was to leave their apartments and accept temporary housing in the 369th Regiment Armory located on 7th Avenue and 141st Street. The other was to accept city-owned vacant apartments suddenly made available. The problem with these 1,000 apartments, however, was that while they had heat, they had no stoves, refrigerators, or toilets, and the large holes in the walls and floors provided easy access for the rats and roaches that invaded the rooms. Assata Shakur, who had taken a leave of absence from Mobilization for Youth and had recently joined Harlem Legal Services to head the Housing Data Bank Project, a special program funded by C.O.W.S, went with Gloria Cox, one of the housing organizers, and Faye Jackson and Judith Abramson, our two paralegals. A few days after the Armory opened to help with food and clothing operations. When they returned, they hurriedly described to me the conditions they had found, and my visit corroborated their observations. The Armory was not being occupied only by families who had sought temporary shelter from the cold. Homeless men from all over the city had been admitted. They had not been separated from the small children on the enormous first floor, but mixed freely among them. The 185 occupants were permitted to use only 2 bathrooms of the 8 in the Armory, and they were not designated by gender. They were filthy, had no hot water, and provided only 1 shower to be shared by everyone. At one point, more than 400 men, women, and children were crowded into the unsegregated space. 3 of the children had chicken pox but were refused admittance to Harlem Hospital because the hospital feared an epidemic among its confined patients. Harlem State Senator Leon Bogues described the sight of men urinating in the corners of the Armory and issued a call for the city to open more shelters and to segregate the single, homeless men and the families. Reverend James S. Robinson of St. Paul's Community Church condemned the lack of privacy and the dirty bathrooms, stating, "People were being treated like they were in concentration camps. Security guards thought they were the Gestapo. People were masturbating in the corners." At his request, the city council representative from Harlem, Fred Samuels, visited and found the conditions deplorable and urged the city to find separate facilities for the derelicts. Immediate legal action was necessary, but I had a problem. My small staff had neither the time nor the expertise to prepare a class action suit to prevent the city from operating the Armory under these conditions. I also anticipated the official wrath that would follow once such an action was filed, and I knew that I was treading the thin line of permissible legal actions established by Legal Services Corporation. I filed a suit anyway. I prepared and typed it at home after the working day, photocopied the complaint on commercial machines, hired private process servers to serve Koch and all the city departments named as defendants, and paid the filing fee in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. But the attorney named in the class action was Harlem Legal Services. Official reaction was instant and furious. Stanley Brezanoff, the administrator of the Human Resources Administration, issued a press release in which he said, "The filing of this suit should get an Oscar for ridiculous performance. How can there be a violation of constitutional rights of people who choose to come to an emergency shelter?" He added, "Harlem Legal Services might better use the funds it must spend to litigate this suit to redress real violations by others of the rights of the poor." In describing the suit, the New York Post headlined its story, "Tenants bite the hand that fed them." And Koch, interviewed on a local television show, said, "Chutzpah, go to Moscow." As he berated tenant leaders across the city who criticized him for being pro-landlord, J.J. Gonzalez, a television reporter on the CBS affiliate in New York, refused to accept my disinclination to discuss the situation but successfully cornered me in the library at Harlem Legal Services for an interview. I described the conditions I had seen and the reasons for the class action. That night, when the segment was aired, my undoctored statements were followed by a scene taken in front of the Armory where a mother who claimed to have been staying in the Armory with her 3 children praised the city, blessed Koch, and applauded the clean and comfortable conditions she had found there. A typical media misinformation campaign fabricated to serve political interests. Within days after the action was filed, Koch closed the Armory precipitously. Still unable to return to their apartments, now with pipes broken from the cold and completely uninhabitable, the families were forced to move to the homeless shelters provided by the city. And most lost their possessions and apartments forever when the city condemned their buildings as constituting a danger and issued vacate orders forcing the last, reluctant ones out into the cold. Sadie Haynes, a member of the class action and the single occupant of a building at 32 Morningside Avenue, offered a solution to the families evicted from the Armory to rehabilitate the building, which was both abandoned and city-owned, with the labor provided by the families. It had 20 apartments, and an engineer determined that with repairs to electrical wiring, plumbing, and the boiler, the building could be made habitable. I donated the $1,000 needed to repair the boiler and provide coal, and many other community organizations donated more than $1,000 for paint, lumber, and other equipment. The families, including children and fathers, began their sweat labor in the building, and Harlem Legal Services initiated negotiations with the city for a lease arrangement with the families. Harlem Congressional Representative Charles Rangel supplied blankets, and Reverend Calvin Butts of the Abyssinian Baptist Church began discussions about establishing a school for the children. But while the community's response was overwhelmingly positive, the majority of the board of directors of Harlem Legal Services was less than enthusiastic, and those members who were dependent on political favor for their jobs, for their agency grants, or for any petty favor bestowed on them by City Hall, joined C.O.W.S.'s efforts to contain and destroy the agency, which had now provided an example of what legal activism could accomplish. C.O.W.S.'s plan became obvious on February 17, 1981, when David Jones, a black personal aide to C.O.W.S., suddenly was added to the board. And at the same meeting at which Jones appeared, I was directed not to take on any other projects other than the ones listed in my report until further notice from the board. The minutes of the meeting further reflected the statement of the chairman that the Harlem Legal Services Board wants its executive director to manage the office and not several other projects. I interpreted other projects to mean special projects I had initiated, like the Housing Data Bank. In 1980, CALS had announced to its delegate corporations that a one-time grant was available for special programs to be funded after proposals had been submitted and approved. The money was to be used for the proposal program only and was not to be commingled with the legal services annual budget. I submitted a proposal for a housing data bank that would identify every vacant building in Harlem, its owner, the date of conveyance, its size, the number of apartments it had contained, the reason for the vacant condition, whether it was condemned, and the reasons given, and would locate the buildings on large maps to identify the pattern of vacant buildings and city acquisition. My purpose was to provide the statistical foundation for a major legal action to be jointly prepared by community law firms and bar associations challenging the city's policy of planned shrinkage. I also visualized, once the data bank had been established, computerizing the information and using it as a central source of instantly available housing information for the Harlem community. After the year's grant ended, I hoped that the project would be continued by one of the housing community agencies in Harlem. Since the board of directors had been careful not to openly display criticism about the Armory suit or to suggest that its action against me was in direct response to the negative publicity C.O.W.S. and the administration had received, it had narrowly worded its directive, addressing it only to special projects. I therefore felt no compulsion to limit the agency's involvement in two other important matters that came to my attention.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. So we will pick up there for audio segment number 2. We did not quite finish the chapter, so we didn't quite get to 19. They were kind of getting on her. You're getting on Mr. Coke, white man, and his policies for making all that niggers get out in the cold. So we didn't quite finish chapter 18. We will pick up once we get to audio segment number 2. If you have observations, questions, thoughts to share, the number 720-5 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. And specifically, since we didn't end the chapter, we left off, we're on specifically page 188, and we'll pick up the paragraph on February 27 as usual. First full paragraph on page 188 of the book hard copy that I have. That's it. The Amsterdam News, I will just say really quick, man, many newspapers, the New York Times, there are many newspapers that covered a lot of the material about this case even before the shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike, and we're talking about Joanne Chesimard, and she had been in the paper, and they were saying she was in all these bank robberies and everything else, and the Black Liberation Army. So there's lots of news coverage, documentaries, news footage as well. But man, the Amsterdam News, they have quite a bit of material, even on Evelyn Williams, and when she was held in contempt and had to go to prison for those like 10 days or whatever it was. They have information on that as well. So it might be, especially if you're in the New York area, you'll have easy access to all of this stuff. That's the type of thing that I say, hey, field trip, if you have offspring or what have you, you can hit the library and go see, check out some of this stuff. Assata Shakur just passed away, so you can go and, hey, what was being said at the time, be more informed. I was looking at some of the reports because she mentioned Evelyn Williams. She mentioned the Amsterdam News in this week's portion, and so I was looking for some of the headlines where they were in support of her and all that, and you can go see some of those reports. I was caught because, as now, they have the comments and all the rest. So way back when, as opposed to comments, people would write letters into the newspaper, and then they would publish those letters subsequently and just put the date referencing whichever previous article or edition that they were talking about. Man, listeners wrote in. This is from December 1, 1979. Readers write, expressing outrage. To the editor, we take this opportunity to adamantly express our outrage and dismay over your front page headline on the November 10 issue of the Amsterdam News. Without speaking substantively to the lopsided tone of Mr. Cooper's page 2 article upon which the headline was apparently based, we want to focus our concern on the irresponsible and unprofessional journalism implicit in the street rumor headline. And the headline for that article that this person is writing about, it was, I believe, street rumor, Joanne Chesimard will not be taken alive, or something to that effect, I think is what the title is. And then it has a picture of these 4 suspects, one of which is the white woman who was mentioned this week, but that's what's on the front page that they're talking about. As we are sure you are aware, street rumor is a vague and nebulous term in the best of circumstances, and is by no stretch of the imagination does it rise to the level of a legitimate news source upon which headlines are based. This is especially true in cases such as the one presently at issue, where human lives hang in the balance of a news story that can neither be substantiated nor confirmed. It is also sad that the source of such a damaging rumor is spread by a black newspaper in a country that has a history of utilizing similar limp excuses as a camouflage to legitimize the most extreme acts of police violence and misconduct. The Amsterdam News has, with the publication of this blatant misrepresentation, helped to perpetuate the illegal tactics of the infamous FBI COINTELPRO, which during the 1960s and 70s manipulated press cooperation with police agencies in disseminating destructive and unsubstantiated rumors. Ironically, some of the FBI-placed rumors have been documented in recently released Freedom of Information Act FOIA files as being aimed at Assata Shakur, Joanne Chesimard, as early as 1971, in light of the fact that the National Publishers Association recently adopted a resolution in support of the Republic of New Africa 11 and all other political prisoners. We would expect the voices of New York City's black community to take a more enlightened approach to issues involving political prisoners. This seems to be particularly relevant in the case at hand, where the political nature of Ms. Shakur's incarceration and escape cannot be denied. We also direct your attention to a petition filed before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights on December 10, 1978, it's a few days after Jonestown, by the National Conference of Black Lawyers, the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ, and the National Alliance Against Race and Political Repression on behalf of Ms. Shakur and various other political prisoners in the United States. In August of 1979, a panel of international jurists toured the United States prisons, interviewing prisoners and investigating prison conditions pursuant to the UN petition. In a report prepared for presentation to the UN Human Rights Commission, the international jurists cited findings of cruel and unusual punishment of politically active prisoners that violate the UN standards of minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. Ms. Shakur was one of the prisoners cited in that selection of the jurists' report. The International Jurist Report additionally charges that the United States prison system has a disproportionately large black population. It charges that whites are jailed at a rate of 43.5 per 100,000 population, and blacks are jailed at a rate of 367.5 per 100,000 population. Wow, that is staggering. Whew. I will stop there. It does go on to give a bit more in tongue lashing them about their sloppy journalism, but I mean, that is a very valid point. Like, where did you get this source that, you know, and I mean, to make that the headline, that she won't be taken alive, thus justifying lethal force, and we gonna need our AR-15s and every bullet you can find, and get the drones, and excellent point, and they were right to publish it. Now, they did put it towards the rear of the paper, which is generally the pattern, but kudos to them for publishing it, and right on for whoever wrote in, because that was standard operating procedure for niggers of that time period, whether they were guilty or innocent, to make them the most ferocious and violent. And Malcolm X has, you know, probably killed 50 people this morning and that sort of thing. And it's, what are you talking about? What? Always, so it'll be justified if they are killed, and it might even inspire you to go ahead and do something about it and bring violence yourself. Just seeing, you know, what? This Assata, what she did, what? She robbed the bank and did what? She broke out and did what? She's not going to be taken alive? What? Ooh, that type of, especially uppity Negro, like. You know. But they have lots of great information. You can see the headline, you can see the sketches, you can see the white woman who's alleged to have helped in this prison break. Look like Sue Africa, you think? Jane Elliott? Not all white peoples is racist. Anyway, let's see. Folks have commentary to share. I can't say enough. If you have the time and or inclination, you know, Assata did just pass away, so if people say, hey, I don't know much information about her, or I maybe want to learn, or have offspring and maybe they want to learn, we can learn together. The Amsterdam News, so-called black newspaper, which they put in quotes in the reader's commentary, but so-called black newspaper, and many other publications from that time period. There's a lot of material, so hey, you could really, especially if you're in the New York area, New Jersey area, You could probably, if you're in the New Jersey area, you could probably just go to Rutgers and clean up. Any hoodles. Let's see. Folks have commentary to share, *61, as we move on through the text. We have probably maybe 2-3 sessions to go. We're closing in on the end of the text. You all can let us know what you learned. Did you pick up any additional information about Assata specifically? Really, have you read any other books about COINTELPRO? Let's see. We'll see. Folks, I'll get in one letter from a listener and then see other folks have commentary as well. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, callers. A theme of this text is the continual experience of loss in the global system of racism, white supremacy by non-white victims. Loss of land, loss of housing, loss of some semblance of freedom due to greater confinement, loss of job, and loss of health. Yeah, that pretty much would describe it. And I forgot this week, have more to say about it tomorrow, but this week is the 120 years from the Wilmington Purge. I thought, my goodness, we've been talking about that for a good month, and then November 10 is the actual day of the massacre, and they had all sorts of ceremonies and events to commemorate it, and they had lots of events throughout the Wilmington area all throughout this week. They even had black professors and teachers talking about the importance of why this needs to be taught in school. Really, that way we will not ever have anybody else write a memoir that is connected to Wilmington, especially if they're classified as black, and they're talking about racism and experiences with black people in the 20th century, and they do not include the Purge, especially early 20th century Wilmington and the Purge, even though that's 1898, close enough. Like, come on. But that was just this week. I'll make sure to include a segment on that tomorrow. But our timing, wow. And I guess I was not even like November 10, the exact day that we were coming up upon 127 years exactly from the massacre. So, Wilmington, that's another one. So much information. If you were in the North Carolina area, take your offspring, go to some of those events this week. They have tons of books. Don't be ignorant about local history. Let's see. The email, chapter 17. A white woman in her early 20s was believed to have been one of the drivers. Sketches of her and 3 black men based on the descriptions provided by the guards. Why was this suspected racist trusted by these black militant revolutionaries? Not all white people are racist. Sue Africa? Hey, it's lots of examples from this time period, earlier time periods, right now time period. Not all white people are racist. Pretty much every single non-white person in the known universe thinks that that is true. That's one. And then Sue Africa, Jane Elliott, John Brown. The Black Panther Party almost bragged about, hey, not all white people are racist, So I don't think, generally speaking, at any period in the system of white supremacy, it generally does not take too much to convince non-white people, classified as black or otherwise. It generally doesn't take too much to convince us, hey, this white person is all right. He, she, she read James Baldwin and he listens to, Kendrick Lamar. He, she is all right. Marched with Dr. King, reads Malcolm X, whatever it is. It generally doesn't take a whole lot to convince us. So, Sue Africa. It could have been Sue Africa, right? It could have been Sue Africa. 2. Quentin Pagano, State Police Superintendent, predicted we will recapture Joanne Chesimard and return her to the place of rescue, whatever effort that takes. You can take that to the bank. The bank phrase became popular in the 1970s due to the TV show Beretta, starring former child actor Robert Blake, who portrayed an unorthodox police detective, and this was his catchphrase. I will say, Jackie Robinson, I believe, this is all certainly way before I was thought of, but I think Jackie Robinson had a reputation for saying, you can take that to the bank. Let me see, maybe I can check. I don't want to stop because that's not the focus, but let's see. Let's see. Because I think this was like something he would, no evidence. That phrase was, yeah, I'd have to go back and get specific articles. Maybe even in his autobiography. I'll check to see if he uses it there. But I think he later in his baseball career got into it with reporters. Anyway, back to the email. Let's see, number 3. Kakuya knew the beautiful bright-colored blankets, dolls, bed, dresses, coats knitted by her mother. Even though she was in greater confinement, she tried to maintain a connection to her child. That disrupting of connection from parents to children, attempted parents, seems like we've read about that lots in the book club. Really, I was thinking like another illustration of how not a whole lot has changed in terms of plantation times to now. You don't even have to be in greater confinement. We did read Richard Williams' Black and White, The Way I See It, and social services could have came and nabbed Serena and Venus, dramatically portrayed with Will Smith in the movie King Richard. But I mean, hey, you got a black child, whatever. We can come and nab them, and you consider yourself a babysitter because we can come take them anytime we want to. 4. Through the peephole, Doris could see the mass of black bodies crowding the hallway. She repeated her insistence that her lawyer be present. Black bodies? Does she mean black policemen? I was a little confused about that too. Part of me was thinking that it might have just been that frequently they'll do these old raids, and I think they were saying like early morning hours, late night hours, that type of thing, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, midnight, 4 o'clock in the morning where it's dark. So it may have been, and sometimes even a part of all this is they'll turn out the power, or at least turn out the lights in the halls, so it's dark, so you can't really see anything. It's just silhouettes of bodies moving around. So it could have just been what you'd like, a mass of black bodies where I can't see any faces, I can't see anything, I just know it's people out there and they're yelling and oh man, that type of thing. So especially with this type of case, I don't think they would send a whole bunch of black officers, especially if they think it might be Assata's hiding out there, or you got knowledge of her. Especially if they just coming to like grab you and smack you around. Where is she at? That type of thing. Like, no, I don't think it would be a bunch of niggers with badges. I could be wrong. And especially at this time period, where would they even have so many nigger officers at this time period? Like 70s, really? 5. William H. Webster, director of the FBI, born 1924, died in 2025, only person to become both FBI and CIA director. He worked in the administration of nearly every president, either directly or indirectly, military, U.S. attorney, federal judge, dating back to FDR. Now this is an expert in racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. Facts. You are director of the CIA and the FBI, buddy. You know all the ins and outs of what racism is and how it works, for sure. 6. Thomas Bernard Locke, Manhattan supervisory special agent for the FBI. He later was in charge of the FBI's investigation of 9/11 in 2001. A long career in the FBI. Has a Facebook page, Thomas B. Locke and Associates, LLC. Wow. What does it mean to be white? 7. Doris cardiac infraction, December 1979. Why are young black women at a high risk for cardiovascular disease? Jalati Kalinowski. This was published in 2019. How heart disease disproportionately affects black women in the U.S., published in 2022. Number 8, Ronald Boyd Hill, former Black Panther, was arrested for aiding the escape of Assata Shakur, enrolling his children at a daycare in Brooklyn at the time of Assata's escape, apparently. Judge Eve Preminger, New York State Supreme Court, all charges dismissed. Preminger is the niece of Academy Award nominated movie director. She was embroiled in controversy regarding her role as a surrogate judge in New York, which are used to settle the estates of the wealthy upon their death. Apparently is a system in which the judges distribute work required to settle estates to various law firms and businesses that they may have connections to, now they have that in quotes, and charge exorbitant fees to the estate, essentially stealing money from the heirs. See, the Butler did it, the legal battle over the estate of Doris Duke, Al Sturgeon, Horworth, and Smith. This is published 2015. How insiders snatch millions from estates in the scandal scarred surrogate courts, published in 2012. Let's see. 9. April 19, 1980, Harlem Morningside Avenue, Morning Avenue 92 raid. Eben Adelona, I think that's it. Eben Adelona, 2 degrees in nursing, a doctoral candidate in anthropology at Columbia University. Dr. Adelona, MS, PhD, CPHQ, seems to have had a long and varied career in various health and well-being disciplines. She has a website, 1008 Solutions, nurturing physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and earth consciousness, and has contact information both on her website and on LinkedIn. They have lots of news reports about this raid, and apparently she was like, at least what else, rumored to be a member of the Black Liberation Army, but it seems like many people were rumored to be at that time. 10. Community Center and Uhuru Sasa Freedom Now School, founded in 1975 by Jitu Wusi. There's a documentary, The Sun Rises in the East, 2022, about the community organization called The East in Brooklyn, New York. It was founded in 1969 after a New York City teachers' strike in 1968, which led to the Uhuru Sasa School. The organization also included a food co-op, news magazine, restaurant, daycare, adult night school, and a farm in Guyana. Jesus Christ, are you serious? Jim Jones 2 times. That cannot be. Like, how close was it to Jonestown, the farm that they... Anyway, we'll have to check all that out. 11. Pregnant Fulani Sunni Ali's Mississippi House musician husband Bilal Sunni Ali was charged with aiding in the escape. He was acquitted April 14, 1981. Miss Ali, she was born 1948, died 2016. The raid on her house included several airplanes, helicopters, and over 200 enforcement officials. 14 children were included in the arrest. That is not funny at all. Like, woo, what do they think the children, what role did they have in this case? Like, we got you, oh, we saw you at the penitentiary. You were there. You were holding the gate open. We saw you. You had that gun. You had it right there. We know you participated. We know you're not potty trained, but you know how to hold a pistol. That's like, what? 14 come on. White people do not care about children. Let's see. 12. No evidence that there were any way her, Joanne Chesimard's bodyguards, or that she was in the van during the shooting. Abdul Majid Anthony Laborde, member of the Black Panther Party, was arrested in Philadelphia in 1982, charged with Assata's escape and the Brinks truck robbery. Bashir Ahmed James Dixon York was arrested for the shootings in 1981 in South Carolina. C. Vernon Mason, the trial's first 2 hung juries, he was one of the attorneys, C. Vernon Mason, and William Kunstler. At the third trial, the district attorney suddenly uncovered several witnesses convicted for 30 years to life. Mr. Majid died in jail. See, Abdul Majid, convicted of killing NYPD cop in 1981, dies in jail. Daily News, this is published in 2016. Mr. Hamid died in 2008. He also died in jail. First trial was a hung jury which divided along racial lines. That's odd because they normally don't have black people on the jury. The second trial was declared a mistrial by the judge because a juror became ill. which provides interesting details on his life. Oh, the Freedom Archives, interesting details on his life before confinement. C. Vernon Mason, former lawyer and civil rights advocate, was involved in several high-profile cases in New York City. He suspected racist Bernard Goetz, the subway vigilante, Michael Griffith's family manslaughter victim of Howard Beach racist terrorist incident, and Tawana Brawley. What? He was subsequently disbarred for mistreatment of 20 clients. Wow. Well, he should write a book. Maybe he has. 13. Sekou Odinga, Nathaniel Burns, Matara Shabaka Sundiata, Samuel Smith, former Black Panthers, allegedly. Police killed Matari, arrested Sekou, tore his toenails off, shoved his head in a toilet bowl. The Brinks robbery indictment was dismissed. New York RICO charges him and Sylvia Baraldini, member of the May 19th organization, a cornucopia of crimes they were charged with, including Assata's escape. 20 years in prison on each count, no parole. Mr. Odinga was released from prison in 2014. He died in 2024 at the age of 79. Miss Baraldini, suspected racist, reportedly drove the getaway car for Assata's escape. She was born in 1947, spent 17 years in U.S. prison, and then repatriated to Italy, her place of birth. She lived in U.S. from age 12 to... She lived in the U.S. from age 12. She was placed on home arrest in 2001 and then paroled by the Italian Minister of Justice in 2006. There are documentaries of her life, The Life of Sylvia Baldini, 2002, and Freeing Sylvia Baldini, 2009. Even that, like, wow. Wow. The white person, even from all of that, all the black people that it seems like it was a lot of black people who probably didn't participate in this at all. They got hemmed up, locked up, arrested, all these goofy trials and everything. Even the time that they had to be detained before they go to 1, 2, 3 trials, all the rest of it. This white woman, if she did participate in this, she's not spending the rest of her life in prison. They didn't get ICE to smack her around and sodomize her and all that. Locked up, and she gets to go back to Italy, get tiramisu, make jokes about the Ethiopians, and get 2 documentaries. I bet she's still alive, too. All these other folks dead, I bet she's still alive. Write a memoir, Wacky Times with those Negroes. Like, come on. Not all white people's is racist. 14. Many other individuals and families were attacked. Posters, Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Assata's Welcome Here, May Jackson activist, Amsterdam News, half-page ad, Run Assata Run. She did seem to get a lot of support from the black community, so-called. Of course, none of this was mentioned in racist white supremacist media when her death was announced. This case was really, really popular, and many black people. I did not know that apparently enough black people were familiar with COINTELPRO that they were looking at this and thinking, this looks suspicious. Like, bravo. That's why you want to pay attention to the news and things that are happening, because COINTELPRO was in the news all the time, every day at this time period. So if you were checking the news, like, oh man, you said Assata did what now? So even the language, the soul of the Negro liberation movement, like what? What? Did she same thing? Did she say that? Did she say she was not going to be taken alive? Or is that another rumor that she's the soul of the Negro movement? Get out of here. Chapter 18, I was never in the tomorrow syndrome. Today was not a bridge tomorrow. Today was to be lived today, and tomorrow was to be lived tomorrow, if reached. Yesterdays were storehouses of time well spent and never to be regretted. Racist white supremacists develop plans extending decades into the future. Now that extra facts, the 500-year plan, Project 2025 and all that. Page 181 to 183, Harlem Legal Services. Our budget was $573,660. The smallest allocation, despite needy population of Harlem, was the largest. Closing of Sydenham Hospital, erosion of housing stock in Harlem, first urban renewal plan, 1956, for St. Nicholas Avenue, Harlem, never implemented. Deputy Mayor Nathaniel Leventhal situational violence inflicted by coaches, policies on families remaining in buildings, accelerating the vacancy rate, methods of victim confusion, population dislocation, aka gentrification, from Neely Fuller Jr. And a lot of this is still stuff that they talk about right now, like having, and I mean, particularly places like New York City and all throughout, like not having affordable housing, and oh my goodness, and the housing, it is deplorable, and oh, it's dilapidated, and why isn't it better, and what are we going to do? And remember, a lot of this is the same stuff that they, like I said, particularly for New York, that you've priced the Negroes out. You don't even have black people in Harlem anymore because you dislocated. We can't even afford to live here, 3. Village Voice newspaper, Ed Koch. That probably, I think a lot of the Village Voice is online, digitized, and or certainly if you're in the New York tri-state area, you would have easy, free access probably at any public library, community college, university, college, library, maybe even online easily, but Village Voice, easily you could pull back and get a lot of this stuff. Ed Koch prepared for winter by turning off the valves on the city's radiators. Sub-zero temperatures. It was a horror story. More than 400 men, women, children into unsegregated space. The Harlem State Senator Leon Vogus, City Council representative from Harlem, Fred Samuels. The conditions were deplorable at the shelter. Class action suit was filed. Official reaction was furious. Let's see. The victim, Leon Vogus, died at age 57 from lung cancer. He was described by Governor Mario Cuomo, father of NYC mayoral candidate and former governor of New York, as a tireless negotiator and selfless individual. Victim Fred Samuels died at 61 of cancer. Once a vocal critic of Mayor Koch, later built a strong working relationship with Mayor Koch, which cost him politically. See New York Times obituaries, 1985 in August and then in September. 3 forms of victim confusion by Neely Fuller Jr. 1. Population dislocation. 2. Population tailoring. Sub-zero temperatures, no water can result in death. 3. Sexual confusion, putting children, women at risk of sexual assault in the armory. Just having that many people stuck together is for sure population tailoring, because they were saying some of the children had chicken pox and they couldn't go to the hospital. So you have all these people stuffed together, as we know from COVID-19. Like, oh man, that's respiratory problems. If there is any sort of respiratory issue, like, oh man, you don't have any fresh air and it's all congested. Like, oh, just the worst of the worst of the worst. I was taken aback because they said family and all these homeless dudes. Like, these wouldn't be privileged black males. Anyway, 4. J.J. Gonzalez, television reporter for CBS New York. Interview, I described these conditions. The scene taken in front of the armory. A mother who claimed to have been staying in the armory blessed Koch. Was this woman a plant put there by racist white supremacists? Hey, we just heard COINTELPRO did a lot of manipulation and lying in newspaper outlets and media, so certainly possible. I was thinking, is that Juan Gonzalez, the tag team partner of my BFF Amy Goodman on Democracy Now? Juan Gonzalez was working during this time period, late 70s. I know he did other activist work earlier on, but I think by this point he was a journalist in the New York City area, so this could have been Juan Gonzalez, CBS New York, before he got to Democracy Now. 5. Koch closed the armory, lost all their possessions. The victim, Sadie Haynes, member of the suit, offered a solution: rehabilitate the building. Reverend Calvin Butts, Abyssinian Baptist Church, establishing a school board of directors. Harlem Legal Services was less than enthusiastic. Koch's efforts to contain, destroy the agency. Reverend Butts died in 2022, pancreatic cancer. Heard that a lot, although he didn't pass away at the youngest of ages. Abyssinia, the largest black church in New York City. Former pastor Adam Clayton Powell Jr. This chapter is an excellent example demonstrating the dedication of the racist white supremacists. They were dedicated to practicing racism, not producing justice. That is flagrant, and I think especially for people who any of the efforts about, oh man, what are we going to do about, affordable housing, and oh man, this is a big problem, especially big city areas, and cost of rent is going up, what are we going to do? This is something they've been talking about for a long time, especially with regards to non-white people. Like, oh my God, we have been talking about this for like 100 years. White people have zero interest in doing justice in any area of people activity. Period. In fact, they just find creative ways of doing a lot of the exact same things, taking advantage of black people in terms of their property. You pay all this money for rent, and then well, you pay all this money on a mortgage, and then we take it back from you. You get nothing. Or we go to appraise your house, and it's supposed to appraise at $550,000, but we appraise it at $160,000 and snicker about it. They got lots of creative ways of doing it. We'll pause there because we didn't really get further in the text. We'll pick up the rest after we finish audio segment number 2. For the folks listening in on the phone line, number 720-716-7300, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. I'll get in a few of my thoughts and then double check if you have thoughts and are with us listening in. Don't wait till the last moment to share your thoughts, observations. Let's see. A few of my thoughts on the portion we read this week. Let's see. Scroll back up to the beginning of 17. I thought it was spectacular code. I guess chapter 17 is also officially beginning of part 3. I thought it was spectacular code that Assata does not tell her Aunt Evelyn anything. She doesn't, hey, we're thinking about breaking out, blah, blah, blah. Like, obviously they are listening in. Fuller talks about that. I mean, that is so codified. He said, if anything, you really want this to be a secret. You really want to make sure that nobody finds out. The best way, do not tell anyone. Anyone means anyone. And you heard, hey, they ripping off people's toenails and all that. Like, we're going to make you talk. We got lots of ways to make you talk. So, I mean, if you really don't want someone to know, shh. Even if you got to appear distracted, what's wrong? You seem like your mind ain't focused. And, you normally chipper and you looking everywhere and you're not even focused and everything. Give her a good hug, and then she'll see everything will be clear. Like, oh my God, she was planning her escape and looking for vulnerabilities. And like, I see, she understood it immediately. Like, of course she couldn't tell me. Of course. Let's see, from 17. She said disbelief, and it seemed like she, preferred, if she is going to be killed or what have you, because that could have easily happened in prison. She would have preferred that happen with her being out and getting a brief moment of, what shall we say, less confinement, we'll say. Let's see. And immediate, she said she was, she read the New York Times article. I said this was widely covered, so you can read the Times to see what they say about the prison break. But they say shortly afterwards, 2 other men arrived at the main gate, cleared the registration building again without being searched, and were driven to the South Hall by the same guard who had escorted the first visitor. He took the 2 men through the fence's locked gate. Now, I kept seeing this because they kept talking about different security checkpoints where these fellas get through and they're not searched. Now, are they able to accomplish this because they got their Italian white woman? Are they former guards? Do they know, like, the secret password? Like, is this, like, we've had many folks over the years talk about, man, we've read about a lot of illustrations of shoddy police work. Is this another example? Like the folks at the correctional institution? Like, so, and even, man, when Mary Kay Letourneau was at the prison, they came and said, we're not going to follow the rule. We're going to do what we want to. We're going to take pictures and do all the rest of it. Like, you don't even frisk people to see if they got a firearm or a pistol when they come in. Like, if you're going to be that pitiful with your job, you deserve to have all kinds of prison breaks or whatever else happen, being truthful. I suspect there's probably not a whole lot of black guards at that time either. White welfare for who's working there. Same thing they're doing with ICE now for these concentration camps. Call it Alligator Alcatraz. Let's see. Same page. Says, although the guard was supposed to have remained in the booth, which operates the unit's doors at the prison, the guard came, I bet that wasn't Lakeisha, I bet that was a white woman, came out when ordered 2. Chesimard and the others handcuffed the guards and herded them into the jail van for a ride to a parking lot in an adjacent school. Again, I mean, if policy and procedure say you're in a bulletproof, enclosement booth, you're not supposed to leave. You're supposed to stay inside, whatever the procedure is. You ring the alarm, call, whatever you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to leave. You're not even in any danger. Why would you leave? Not doing what you're supposed to do. Again, man, what in the world? Follow the code. I guess they don't have enough slips in the code because they're still stomping on us, but man. The guards were left in the van unharmed. I thought that was important just because they've done in newspaper reports and such, they keep saying we got all these cop killers and, Assata, they're just bloodthirsty and they just want to kill all the white people. If that is true, and she's been subjected to all this torture in the prisons and they've messed over her and she just hates all the white people, why wouldn't they, at least get in a good, whack on the skull and box their ears a few times and give them a good wedgie and something, even if we're not going to be lethal about it, we going to, I don't know, dunk your head in a toilet, something. It said they were left unharmed. Come on. Let's see. This is kind of obscure, but I thought it was important. Now, this is Evelyn Williams, she's talking about a few days before the prison break, and she's trying to put it together in her mind, like, did I miss anything? Like, what in the world? And she says that on November 2, this a few weeks before, she said she was going to go to the prison, but she was going to wait. She normally takes a cab, but she says there was no bus to the prison. On this day, she called and she couldn't get any information about why the cab wasn't there and why no one was available. She said the train station was a considerable distance from the jail. I thought all of that was important just because even now, frequently, that is a deliberate part of the plan. We're going to stuff these prisons with as many Negroes. What they said is, like 350 Negroes locked up out of a population of 100,000, which was astronomically higher than the white rate of incarceration, deliberately so. But when they lock up all these black people, we're going to put you in a place that is a great distance from your attempted family, anybody that cares about you, so it'll be really hard for you to maintain connections to what they call the outside world. You'll be really disconnected, and it'll just be you here, isolated in greater confinement. You won't have any support system and any semblance of hope, and you can make it and hang on, Leroy, and just be none of that. We can just totally break you and do whatever we want to you, and then you'll be embarrassed to even talk. We won't even give you phone privileges. We'll make that expensive and prohibitive, so that won't be available either. But they do all that deliberately. Family can't get on the bus and come see. Ain't no bus here. Family can't get on the train and come see. Ain't no train here. If they don't have a car and they don't have free time, and sometimes they'll put the prison so that it's like a 3, 4, 5 hour drive from, where you live at, where your relatives and such. Like, all of that done deliberately. Let's see. She said, except for 2 occasions at Christmas, Assata had seen Kikuyu only through a glass partition that separated inmates from visitors on Rikers Island. Shout to Khalif Browder. Like, again, that, attempted parents, that is the system of white supremacy racism. We'll make it so that you won't even remember what your child looks like. You never get to see him. We can do it easy. You won't even remember Devontae's name, after enough time passes. Much less his face. You won't have no remnants, nothing. We can do it easy. So Richard Williams talked about the same thing. Malcolm X said him, same thing. Pile all of you up in foster care. We arrest enough of you. Hey, we bound to get a bunch of you in foster care. Let's see. So after the escape, now this is the other thing you have to think of. So after the escape, the terrorism fugitive squad of the FBI, they show up on your mama's porch. Eep. I don't even have no information on the terrorism fugitive squad of the FBI. Like, what? That was the mass of Negro body, or black bodies. She didn't say they were Negroes, but just black bodies where maybe they did, turn out the light in the hallway so you can't even see. Like, what Well, she did the intelligent thing. I'm not going to open the door and, do whatever you need, officers. Take anything you need. I'm having, ooh. I read the newspaper. I know something about COINTELPRO. You can contact do you have a warrant? You're not just going to bang on my door and put your gun in my face and intimidate me. I am scared for sure. You can bomb this whole place, but wait a minute now. Do you have a warrant? Where's my attorney? Am I under arrest? Like, hey, just asking questions. So they go and terrorize Assata's mother. As I said, 7 o'clock in the morning. They love doing that type of thing. 7 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock at night, 3 o'clock at night. We know she's in there. Get out of here, right? And drag you out of bed type of thing. Love that sort of thing with black people. Let's see. It said then they came to the school where she taught and spoke to the principal, who called her out of the classroom to tell her the FBI was there and would not leave until she talked to them. It was open school week and the parents present in her classroom buzzed about the drama unfolding. I'm sure, the terrorism fugitive squad of the FBI, I'm sure they knew, hey, it's Parents Week. They'll be in the classroom. Maybe we'll get her fired. Serves that nigger woman right. Birthing such a spawn, go out and cause us all this trouble. Now I say, if you got all this, you got the terrorism squad, you can go up to the school and do all this, why could you have followed procedures at the prison? Maybe frisk visitors? Have your affirmative action DEI white woman hire, have her follow policy and procedure, stay in the bulletproof containment, as opposed to coming out, opening up all the gates. Maybe that. Let's see. And they said they wanted to advise. William H. Webster, I believe he was director of the FBI and then later CIA, or might have flipped the ordering. He said, we wanted to make contact just to impress upon them that it's safety. We're going to take her in the cups. Get out of here, man. Why they talking about kidnapping folks and all of it? Get out of here, man. Stop you looking like you trying to kidnap me. Coming with the terrorism force all this early in the morning on my doorstep. Get out of here. And we already heard they had all the electronic surveillance. Remember, they had the whole apartment floor rented out. She never had no neighbors, and we just keeping tabs, listening, watching. Surveillance of all sorts. Now imagine what kind of surveillance they got. Both now 2025 and then now after the escape, what kind of surveillance they got on her. Oh man, whole building, whole family. Let's see. And they start going and snatching up any black person, which this is exactly what Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly told us. If you are classified as black, you are a suspect. Any black person will do. Any black person will do. Said a few days after Assata's escape, a white policeman attempted to arrest 4 black University of Maryland students in Ashbury Park, New Jersey. The officer, who suspected that one of the students was Assata, fired a shot into the air and was quickly surrounded by a jeering crowd that forced him to admit his mistake and retreat to the precinct. Wow. I would like to get more information about that. I mean, now, one, that just shows the danger. I mean, any Negro will do. You look like Assata. Why? Got that kinky hair and, man, we ain't got no facial recognition, which mixes up niggers all the time now. This is just, I'm white and you look like Assata. You got to be Joanne Chesimard. That's you. And he fired a shot like, oh my God, like it ain't no, wait a minute, let's do the thing. Do you have identification? Maybe you got a driver's license and we can nip all this in the bud. No. Who are the other 3 people? Y'all in the Black Liberation Army too. What? Wait a minute. I'm on spring break. What do you mean? Or I guess they want Thanksgiving break, 'cause this is in November. I'm on Thanksgiving break. What you mean? Black Liberation? I'm trying to get a degree. What you mean? Smacking up any black person. We've heard that for lots of time. We just go smack around any black person. And it's kind of difficult for me to imagine that happening now, even if it was just one or two officers and it was a crowd so big, they've already fired a shot. A crowd comes around upset about this shot, and the officers, my bad, made a mistake, they're going to go on back to headquarters. Like, what? What? They're not going to call for backup? And, oh, settle down, Leroy. Cut all that out. Nothing to see here. Back up. Where's the pepper spray? They don't, do all that. Like I said, call in reinforcements. Strange times indeed. They went through all this talking about Iban Edalona and all the degrees that she had from Columbia and a doctoral candidate and everything else, lofty credentials. Race soldiers do not care at all. Said they burst in while she was asleep. I told you, they love that 2 o'clock in the morning. They're not going to come 9 a.m. Like, think maybe you're up, dressed, drinking your coffee, about to start. No. We could do this first thing, and then we're going to come at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5, scare you to death. Like, what is going on? What? I'm not even dressed yet. What? Scare her daughter to death. You got that nigger woman here, don't you? Might be related to her. Is that you, in fact? Your daughter have something to do with it? Where was she at the time of the escape? Bursted and forced her into the hallway, ordered her to raise her nightgown so they could search her for gunshot wounds under the impression she was Assata. Ain't that slave man? That's delectable Negro. He talked about it. You can't even have clothes. That was a frequent part of the punishment of the slave. We're gonna take your clothes away. We're gonna beat you too. We're gonna take your clothes away. You don't have the right to decide, if you're gonna wear clothes or be what they call it, buck naked. So we're gonna make you take it, and you don't have the authority. You're not gonna tell us no. I'm gonna keep my clothes on, and I'm sure this wasn't no environment where it was we're gonna get a whole bunch of females, or maybe get 1 or 2 females, make sure one of them is a black female, and be super courteous and professional about this, and gloves on, do the identification, go off to a private room, none of the male off, make them go stand outside, have some decency, but none of that. Even if that white DEI hire is present, it's not going to be none of that. Let's see. And they just arrest more black people, and you were in the Black Panther Party. And again, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, if you could be Black Panther Party just if they saw you reading the Black Panther Party newspaper. Maybe you went to one of their breakfast programs because you were hungry and said, "Oh, you're in the breakfast." No, I went to get some bacon. You're a Black Panther. We got to take it down to the precinct for that sort of thing was widespread. Same thing for any other organization you can think of. Black Liberation Army, SCLC, NAACP. It doesn't matter. Black Lives Matter. Doesn't matter. You're a black identity extreme. You're a nigger. You're a suspect, and we got to keep tabs. Got to keep tabs on you because you might get up to something. Let's see. And they indeed do have articles of support in the Amsterdam News for Assata Shakur. And articles about COINTELPRO in general. Let's see, anything else I'll get in before we get to audio segment 2? All of her work with the housing situation, even though this is very cyclical, repetitive, routine in the system of white supremacy. And I mean all of the details about, in fact, some of these scenes remind me of Invisible Man. Remember we read about that, the black tenants, that's kind of early in the book, where the black tenants in Harlem, I believe they're about to get evicted, but very admirable. She is just such a hard worker, Evelyn Williams, in so many ways, and just fighting against racism. Her whole life, just fighting against racism, and deliberate, and it seems like it'll just be her, one little black female by herself against this entire army of very powerful white people who can throw her in jail, fire her, kill her, throw her out in the street. Like, just wow. I mean, it is very impressive, but that also, I would say, is a major pattern. All these losses are happening because it seems like it is like her, even the people that are supposed to be here, they're like, dang, these white lawyers, we supposed to be working together. It seems like they part of the COINTELPRO too. Like, man, whew. What domination looks like. Context of White Supremacy. Katherine Massey Book Club. Inadmissible Evidence. Audio segment 2.
On February 27th, as usual, I was in the office at about 7:30 a.m. My early arrivals and open door amused the staff, who had become accustomed to the appearance of the executive director at about 11 o'clock a.m., after which he secreted himself behind his closed door until 3 o'clock, when he left for the day. I used the early morning time before everyday office matters consumed me to review my appointments, check the law journal, photocopy and distribute cases of significance to the staff, check the previous day's intake for new cases accepted and the attorneys assigned to them, and prepare the next year's budget, statistical evaluations, and reports to the board of directors. On that day in February, I was drinking coffee and looking through the large windows facing 125th Street, contemplating the restrictions laid down by the board and pondering whether I would be able to remain in a job that required only an office manager. Hardly the position for which I had submitted my resume. I thought about approaching some of the board members who seemed amenable to the new challenges for change and to the possibility of an agency different from the previously dormant, invisible agency that had become a means for lethargic and uninterested lawyers to obtain a weekly paycheck and for board members to receive questionable status and petty favors. But I also wondered if my motives in soliciting their support would be perceived as generated by self-interest and a ploy to retain a very well-paid job. I was in the midst of this dilemma when Afeni, Gloria Cox, Joyce Ware Thomas, a community activist who was campaigning against the format of the Brownstone Lottery, and Carolyn Rivers, another community activist who worked at Mobilization for Youth, walked into the office. I was surprised to see them. It was only 8:20, but as they drank their coffee and ate Danish, they explained their urgency. Funeral services had just been held the week before for the 17th black child found murdered in Atlanta, and the mystery surrounding their deaths was a topic of frequent discussion in black communities across the country. The murderer had not been apprehended, and the similarities of their deaths, usually by strangulation, their young ages, which ranged from 10 to 14, and the locations in which their bodies had been discovered indicated a serial killer. But the fact that all but 2 females were black male children stirred even more ominous overtones and more frightening speculations. Was the KKK responsible? Another theory posed the possible involvement of the U.S. government so that blood or other specimens could be obtained for an experiment in genetic manipulation. The latest discovered child was Jeffrey L. Mathis, age 10, and on the weekend, the Daily News' center spread had photographs of his funeral and of the inconsolable tear-stained face of his mother, Willie Mae Mathis. By May 1981, 5 more bodies would be discovered and 5 more children would be reported missing. My staff members' immediate question was whether we could organize a candlelight vigil for the families in remembrance of the children of Atlanta and in a demonstration of unified compassion with their grief. Each of the staff members had small children and their empathy was vivid. The idea was as exciting as the chances of success seemed remote. What form should the vigil take? What would be the most appropriate route? Permits would be required. Speakers would have to be chosen. A speaker stand would have to be constructed. Time was important. The vigil needed to be held quickly, but was there time to get the information out to the public? How could we synthesize our efforts to include as many organizations as would be interested in participating? Would the media cover the event? And the most important factor, would the mothers from Atlanta be willing to make the trip to New York? I wondered whether the board would consider this a special project and prevent our involvement. But I made my decision without hesitation. I gave the go-ahead and agreed to underwrite the plane fare and other travel expenses, including hotels, restaurants, and any other miscellaneous monies that might be needed. The four were a tremendous resource of information and community associations. Their energy and competence flushed positively across their faces. They knew we could do it. I gave them carte blanche to use my private telephone, and the first call they made was to the Stop Save Them or Parish office in Atlanta, an organization started by the mothers of the murdered children. Camille Bell, whose son Yusuf, age 9, had been missing since October 1979 and had been discovered in November 1979, dead of strangulation, was the chairperson. Willie Mathis was the vice president, and Venus Taylor, whose daughter Angel Lanier, age 12, was found in March 1980, dead of strangulation, was the secretary. When we reached them, we learned that they had mounted a national campaign to press for state and federal investigations of the murders and had been making public appearances to bring the murders to the attention of the public outside Atlanta. They were on a tight speaking schedule and could be in New York from March 12th to 16th. They agreed to come, and the vigil was scheduled for March 13th. The only board member who evidenced any enthusiasm for the plan was Valerie Jordan, a tall, soft-spoken, good-looking woman, genuinely interested in Harlem affairs and a longtime volunteer. Her only comment was to wonder if we could guarantee a crowd on Friday the 13th, a day notorious for its superstitious aura. At the same time, she gave me a list of organizations to invite to participate. Organizational support came from every segment of the black population, both in Harlem and throughout the other boroughs. Unions, tenant organizations, churches, health workers, and hospital workers became part of the march. The list of sponsoring organizations included the Coney Island Community Health Center, the Coalition to Save Sydenham Hospital, the Black United Front Metropolitan and Harlem chapters, the National Black Human Rights Coalition, Black Women's Collective, Black New York Action Committee, National Black Independent Party New York Chapter, Neighborhood Boards 1, 3, and 5, the National Black Students Association, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the West Harlem Community Organization, the Church of the Resurrection, the Abyssinian Baptist Church, the Nation of Islam, Harlem Consumer Educational Council, the Community League, the Jackie Robinson Foundation, Local 420, District 65, Harlem and Bellevue Hospital Workers, Wamco Wasigsa Community School, United Harlem Growth, the Addicts Rehabilitation Center Gospel Choir, the College Print Shop, the Workers at General Motors Corporation in Tarrytown, New York, the New Birth Collective, the Black Acupuncture Association of North America, the Urban League, the Republic of New Africa, Harlem Health Research and Development Corporation, the Parents Association of PS 85, the Patrice Lumumba Coalition, the West Side Community Organization, and many others. More than 800 concerned employees and friends at Bellevue Hospital contributed $850 to the families, and Rosemary Mealy, a local radio host and longtime community activist, proudly delivered the messages and the checks. The North Star Fund issued a special grant to Harlem Legal Services to be used for transportation and other expenses incurred for the families. Many more hundreds of dollars were donated to the families by other organizations and individuals. Rosemary obtained the sound permit to operate the loudspeaker at the termination of the march. Bill Lynch, later to become an aide to New York Mayor David Dinkins, provided the platform truck for the stage and set it up. Amadou Bafemi took responsibility for security, along with other members of the Republic of New Africa, monitoring the route with walkie-talkies. Community organizations arranged for speakers who included Florence Rice, director of the Harlem Consumer Educational Council, Father Lawrence Lucas of Resurrection Church, and Pat Wagner, community organizer, along with the Atlanta Mothers. Jazzmobile donated music, and the Abyssinian Baptist Church Choir and many other dance and vocal companies volunteered their talents. The children of Harlem read poetry they had composed. Flyers, Candles and green ribbons were donated for the vigil, and Harlem children tied the ribbons around every tree along the route. On the evening of March 13th, more than 20,000 people walked in silent remembrance, holding candles and wearing the green ribbons up Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard from 110th Street to the Speaker's platform at the Schomburg Library at Malcolm X Boulevard and 135th Street. Traffic had been rerouted, and the glowing lights of the candles moved slowly and ceremoniously through the night from sidewalk to sidewalk. Mothers and fathers and small children walked, united, resolute, responding to the murders of the Atlanta children who could have been their own. The media coverage was all any organizer could have wanted from the time the families arrived at LaGuardia Airport at 8:30 a.m. on the morning of Thursday, March 12th, to the time they left the city the following Monday morning. At the first press conference, the day the families arrived at the Harlem State Office building on 125th Street, the press was represented from as far away as Brazil. I was in charge of arranging the families' many television, radio, and newspaper interviews, which included Tony Brown's Journal, Gil Noble's Like It Is, NBC's Live at 5 with Carol Jenkins, Channel 5's Pablo Guzman. Radio interviews with Rosemary Mealy on WBAI and Jane Tillman Irving's Access on WCBS. And an interview on WLIB. The Black Caucus, politicians in the New York State Legislature, and the coalition of black trade unionists met with the families and promised their continued support. On Saturday, Reverend Calvin Butts held a luncheon with 5 organizational representatives at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, and the visit ended with a special commemorative service at Reverend Herbert Daughtry's House of the Lord Church in Brooklyn on Sunday. The 5 days were exhausting, but one was heartened that they had become a part of Harlem's history that I think its people will never forget. Chapter 19. Pride about the leadership role Harlem Legal Services had provided in mobilizing the vigil and the weekend's events revived my hopes that it could become a neighborhood entity of substance. But with the exception of Shirley Carter, a Harlem lawyer of inestimable prestige, and Valerie Jordan, the board never mentioned the vigil to me. Instead, restrictive memoranda after restrictive memoranda from the chairman were placed on my desk with increasing frequency. I had initiated a practice of inviting community organizations to hold their evening meetings in our large library, which was separated from the rest of the office. Doors to the attorney's offices were locked, and I remained until the meetings ended, along with one of the investigators who volunteered to stay late with me. I received a memorandum: no organizations are to use the library for meetings without prior approval from the chairman. On occasion, some of the small children of staff members came to the office after school when their mothers worked late. A memorandum was placed on my desk: no children are allowed in the office at any time. The written reports I submitted to the board describing office procedures, progress reports on the budget, and other matters were so detailed and lengthy that the board passed a resolution that my reports, both written and oral, be shortened. But at each meeting, the same questions were asked about the same complete answers I had already given. The board members were especially concerned about the housing data bank, despite the fact that it was directly supervised by C.O.W.S, was outside the Harlem Legal Services budget, and was solely within my province to administer. Ignoring the full disclosure of every detail I had given them about it, they continued to ask, what was its budget? What was its purpose? Didn't it duplicate other city services? Was it necessary? Who was hired from the special funds? What expenditures had already been made? How much money was left? The questions were accusatory, as if I were designing a foul plot. When 3 staff lawyers resigned, C.O.W.S instituted a hiring freeze that prevented me from hiring replacements. Shortly thereafter, the remaining lawyers went on their annual strike for higher wages, leaving the clients they were representing stranded in landlord-tenant court. While I supported the strike, my concern for the many clients being represented by the agency far outweighed my sympathy for the lawyers' cause. They refused to accept my recommendation that at least one of them volunteer during the strike to appear in court for their clients, if for no other purpose than to adjourn cases until the strike ended. They not only rejected the suggestion but demanded that intake be closed, even for emergencies, which I refused to do. To my way of thinking, the lawyers had failed to advise their clients of the imminent strike, the legitimate reasons for it, and the fact that the legal services on which their clients had relied would be interrupted. The result was a complete absence of community support. It is my belief that no public or private agency or politician or individual can remain viable without seriously communicating and connecting with the community. David Abramson, a young White Vista volunteer who had been assigned to Harlem Legal Services by C.O.W.S and whose stipend was paid from federal funds, joined me in landlord-tenant court every morning for the month it took to defend cases abandoned by the lawyers. Without David's tireless assistance, many families would have been summarily evicted. The board knew about the strike and its devastating impact. They responded to the crisis by demanding to know why more experienced attorneys could not be used in landlord-tenant court to represent Harlem Legal Services. The minutes of their May 18, 1981 meeting continue. The executive director stated that Mr. David Abramson, who now represents Harlem Legal Services in the court and is recently associated with Harlem Legal Services, has done a fine job. He has accompanied her on several occasions in court and has built up a tremendous amount of experience. The minutes do not reflect my report to them about the strike, or that David was a Vista volunteer and not on the Harlem Legal Services budget, or that I had not hired him, or that there were no other attorneys to represent the clients in court, or that the families, had they not been represented, would have been evicted. Instead, the board directed me to hire only experienced lawyers in the future. They intruded beyond their legal parameters into every aspect of office operations, no matter how automatic or mundane. They invited the staff attorneys to meet with them in secret session to air any grievances they might have with the office and me. At one board meeting, Shirley Carter impatiently reminded them that the matters which were in my sole discretion as executive director should remain in my discretion and not be usurped by the board. At that meeting, however, their hidden agenda was revealed. After my report, the board went into executive session, and when they returned, they charged me with permitting the Black Panther Party to use the photocopying machine. I could not believe the morbid mentality that could resurrect this once great but now extinguished dinosaur for the purpose of tainting me with what they considered to be an undesirable association. I knew of no active branch of the Black Panther Party after its COINTELPRO engineered demise in 1971. Of course, Assata Shakur was an acquitted defendant in the Panther 21 trial, but the clumsy, stupid attempt to discredit me was more humorous than threatening. And it bruised my intelligence. Even assuming I was a member of an organization they classified as terrorist, would I be so stupid as to advertise my association in this meaningless, open way? But a memorandum was placed on my desk following the meeting. The photocopy machine is not to be used without special prior approval by the chairman. By now, all of my questions about quitting were resolved. I would resign, but not before Harlem Legal Services settled one more pending major piece of litigation it had initiated. On March 2nd, as plans for the vigil were underway, Susie Grier, a tenant living in a group of city-owned row houses on West 139th Street between 5th Avenue and Malcolm X Boulevard, came with an urgent problem. When the intake worker called me to evaluate the situation, doubting it was an acceptable case for us, I reviewed the information she had taken. As far as I was concerned, no case was unacceptable unless the client's income exceeded the guidelines or it fell into one of the categories specifically prescribed by the Legal Services Act. Ms. Grier's only income was from Social Security, and her emergency was a forthwith vacate order that had been posted in her building that morning demanding that all tenants immediately vacate the buildings because a condition existed that threatened the health and safety of the residents. The buildings were without water. Alarmed, I interviewed Ms. Grier and learned that there were 42 tenants of an original 275 living in the buildings, which had been designated for gut rehabilitation by the Roden Sanford Corporation developers. I decided that Harlem Legal Services should represent the tenants, but there were many facts still to be determined to support the allegation of a violation of the constitutional right not to be deprived of property without due process of law. Besides federal violations, what New York State constitutional and statutory violations had occurred? And there was little time. The vacate order meant now. But the city's action taken against these tenants was being duplicated all over Harlem. It was displacing people arbitrarily, in defiance of due process, to make way for unaffordable new buildings to which the tenants could never return. It was a classic application of the marvel of gentrification. And I was leaning toward filing a class action on behalf of all the tenants, not only in Harlem, but citywide, so affected. I discussed the matter with the director of litigation, Ishmael Lahab, who gave his predictable evaluation. This was not a case for us. When I pressed him for a reason, he said he didn't think we should get involved. I then asked the staff attorneys to work with me on the case. Each one declined, stating that his or her caseload was too large to permit time for additional work. I could simply have assigned it to one of them. To put a case of this degree of importance and legal complexity into inexperienced hands was one thing, but to discard it into resentful and indifferent hands was another. So I filed the class action suit in federal court myself. The rest of the staff joined me in battle. The tenant organizers blanketed each of the buildings, obtained information and approval for the class action, and documented residency histories. I was also fortunate to have Raymond Machado on staff. I had hired him to head a project I was designing on behalf of prisoners whose civil rights were violated, and Ray, an ex-offender himself, had unparalleled investigatory skills. He spent 2 entire days at City Hall, the City Planning Commission, and the Board of Estimates searching for the evidence I needed to support the federal action I was contemplating. Ray's investigation revealed several interesting facts. Simeon Goler was the black secretary-treasurer of Roden Sanford, the developer, and the president of RGS Realty Corporation, which owned all of the Roden Sanford stock. Goler had been involved in the civil rights movement, had been chairman of the New York City Housing Authority from 1970 to 1973, and had been appointed by Mayor John Lindsay as a family court judge from 1973 to 1976. In later years, Goler was to run for public office on a platform promising affordable housing for the poor. In 1979, Goler first approached Housing, Preservation, and Development HPD with his plan to rehabilitate the 5 buildings on West 139th Street. The buildings consisted of 6 stories of walk-up apartments with a total of 334 units and 8 stores. His plan was to convert them into 2 6-story elevator buildings that would contain 214 units, including 6 studio apartments and 94 one-bedroom apartments. At that time, the Harlem Interagency Council for the Aging was competing with Roden Sanford for site development, but withdrew its bid in exchange for becoming a co-sponsor and the community advisor group for Roden Sanford with a guaranteed monetary payoff. The plan was subject to the New York Private Housing Finance Law, the New York City Charter, and the City Planning Commission's Uniform Land Use Review procedures known as ULURP before final approval could be given by the Board of Estimate. ULURP required full due process, which included a 10-day public notice of hearings to be conducted by community boards in which the site was located, in this case Community Board Number 10, the City Planning Commission, as well as the Board of Estimate. Additionally, ULURP specifically set forth the only way in which the recommendations of a community board would be considered by the City Planning Commission. Notice of a public hearing at least 10 days before the scheduled date and a legal quorum present at the time the vote was taken. Failure to comply rendered approval of the project null and void, and it could not be submitted to the City Planning Commission for approval by the Board of Estimate. Ray obtained the minutes of the hearing before Community Board Number 10 at the time it voted to approve the Goler project. There had been no quorum. He further extracted from the city record, in which all city notices are printed, the failure of the City Planning Commission to give a 10-day notice of its hearing, at which time it approved the plan. This information, together with the action HPD had taken in violation of the tenant's statutory and constitutional rights, formed the basis of the action I was prepared to bring against the city and Roden Sanford. The story as told by the tenants and as substantiated by Ray's investigation revealed that after Community Board Number 10 approved the plan on August 12, 1980, the City Planning Commission approved the plan on the following day, finding that ULURP due process procedures had been met. I must point out that elementary due process is violated by the requirement that the public notice be placed in the city record, typed in print so small that it must be perused with a magnifying glass to be seen. To say nothing about the reality that no one reads the city record, even city officials. But in order for Goler to obtain an FHA mortgage, the buildings had to be vacant, and the city used every guerrilla tactic possible to displace the tenants. On March 1, 1980, the city discontinued heat, hot water, and janitorial service, forcing many tenants to move. When some remained, the city posted a notice to vacate in the hallways on August 29, 1980. It stated, "Please take notice that the City of New York, which is not the owner of the building, seeks to empty and demolish the building and demands that you vacate and move out within 90 days after this notice to vacate has been served upon you. If you fail to vacate and move out of the building within 90 days, the city will commence appropriate judicial proceedings to have you removed from the building. This action is necessitated in order to implement a plan for the development of the site upon which the building is located." However, Earl Murray, the area director of the NREM Property Management Office in Central Harlem, which was responsible for maintaining city-owned properties, proved the vacate order was merely a device to cover up HPD's intention to rid the building of tenants as quickly as possible. Just before the vacate order was issued, Murray wrote to his director, Robert Moncrief, that although he could install a new boiler needed in the building, based upon the uncertainty of future plans, I would not, in good conscience, spend $820,000 to $825,000 to install a new boiler. Therefore, my decision would be to submit these 5 buildings to the consolidation unit to vacate, saying, "We should advise the sponsor." This unilateral opinion, which deprived the tenants of essential services for life functions, not only was inhumane but violated the Housing Maintenance Code. That code specifically sets forth a legislative declaration that the sound enforcement of minimum housing standards is essential to bring about the basic decencies and minimal standards of healthful living in already deteriorated dwellings, which, although no longer salvageable, must serve as habitations until they can be replaced. The obligation of the City of New York to maintain minimal standards of healthful living, even in apartments which are designated for site project development, is clear. Further, HPD violated its own rules and regulations of 1973, which specifically state that until tenants have been relocated, they are entitled to essential services. So the refusal to repair the boiler constituted violation of statutory as well as constitutional rights. The tenants, particularly the elderly, still resisted relocation to hotels or uninhabitable apartments in neighborhoods far removed from Harlem, unfamiliar and threatening to them. The quality of the apartments to which they were invited by the city was the same as that offered to the families forced to find temporary shelter in the Armory that month: no refrigerators, stoves, or toilets, and infested with rats and roaches. At the time the 1980 vacate order was issued, there was a total of 275 tenants in the buildings. But by January 26, 1981, specifically as a result of the threats of the vacate order and the lack of heat, the number had been reduced to 42. Despite the fact that Goler's project, Harlan Houses, was threatened by the city's failure to clear out the buildings, he offered the tenants no alternative plan, money, or other inducements to ease their burden of relocation. Instead, he sent a letter to all of the remaining tenants, including Susie Grier, stating, May I point out that you must arrange to remove from your present apartment no later than March 15, 1981, or you and your neighbors will be denied urgently needed housing at affordable rents and or course. You will not receive from the City of New York relocation benefits to which you are entitled if the project goes through. This letter was sent in light of the city's clear position that there were no relocation benefits available to the tenants, and despite Goler's own representation at Community Board Number 10E's hearing that he could make no promises that any of the tenants removed from the site would return to the rehabilitated buildings. I learned further that James Roble of the Community Law Office, a group of volunteer Wall Street lawyers, had met with Willa Van Eaton, a real estate manager in the relocation unit of HPD, and with the tenants who had come to him for legal assistance on November 5, 1980. At that meeting, Van Eaton told the tenants that relocation benefits of 1 month's rent and a month's security to find an apartment could not be offered by the city. I also learned that Robles told Van Eaton that he would not bring an action against the city on behalf of the tenants, negating his promise to the tenants that he would. On January 28, 1981, the city accelerated its assault against the tenants. It capped the main water lines leading into the buildings from the street, and now, in addition to no heat or hot water, they had no heat and no water at all. But the 42 stubborn tenants remained, clinging to familiar, if incredibly uninhabitable conditions, still hopeful that someone, somewhere would help them correct the situation. They had no idea that help would not come from the Community Law Office. Neighborhood children brought water up to the tenants from the fire hydrants in the street, and they heated it over their gas ranges. And Goler continued to urge the city to evict the remaining tenants, complaining it was not acting quickly enough. On March 1, 1981, the city responded by issuing the forthwith vacate order. The reason given was that the building constituted a danger to the life, health, and safety of the occupants and was unfit for human habitation because of the following conditions: no heat, no hot or cold water, broken water pipes in the rear cellar, no electricity in the public hallways from the 3rd to the 6th stories. The interaction between Goler and the city reeked of collusion, but I had no way of proving it. I relied on what appeared to be clear constitutional violations, and so framed the complaint I filed in federal court. The first claim for relief charged the defendants: Anthony Gleedman, Commissioner of HPD; Herbert Sturz, Chairman of the 201 City Planning Commission; Edward Koch, Chairman of the Board of Estimate and the Mayor of New York City; Lloyd Williams, Chairman of Community Board Number 10, and Roden Sanford Corporation, in their individual and official capacities with improperly using their official powers to terminate vital services, including water supply to the plaintiffs, thereby violating their property rights, their rights to due process and equal protection of the law and freedom from cruel and inhuman treatment as guaranteed by the 5th, 8th, and 14th Amendments to the Constitution of the United States. The second claim for relief charged that the acts of the city defendants in illegally using their official powers under color of state law to terminate vital services by issuance of a vacate order, which was predicated upon their own intentional failure to make a simple repair, constituted a collusory effort with the other defendants to force plaintiff occupants to move from their apartments in violation of plaintiffs' rights under 42 U.S.C. 1983. And represents a conspiracy to deprive plaintiffs of the equal protection of the law in violation of 42 U.S.C. 1985. And the third claim for relief charged that the city defendants approved the application for rehabilitation of the West 139th Street site submitted by Roden Sanford without complying with Section 197 C.O.W.S. of the New York City Charter, which acts constituted a violation of plaintiffs' civil rights under 42 U.S.C. 1983. Judge Kevin Duffy signed the order directing all the defendants to show cause on March 6th. An injunction should not be issued prohibiting the city from forcibly removing the tenants, prohibiting the implementation of the site development, and ordering the city to restore water to the tenants. During the hearing, the city presented its main argument that Harlan houses would provide 214 completely rehabilitated apartments in a 15-block tract, which has been one of the great achievements in the Renaissance of Harlem, that Harlan houses would have to be abandoned if the site is not cleared immediately. And the city would lose its entitlement to the $12 million of federally insured monies which are to pay for the development. The judge turned to me angrily and said, "Is this what you want? Don't you want Harlem to be rehabilitated?" And he abruptly left the courtroom after dismissing the complaint and refusing to issue the injunction. Duffy had given no reason for his decision, but I filed an appeal nevertheless. I was without hope that, even if the appeal was successful, there was time to avoid the evictions. Had there been time, we could have gone up to the Supreme Court of the United States. I consoled myself with the thought that at least the tenants had received a 5-day reprieve, during which time the tenant organizers had been communicating with other organizations in an attempt to relocate them. Unless water and other services were restored, relocation was the only realistic alternative for them now. I visited the tenants in their apartments. They were so helpless, old residents of Harlem who had been living in the buildings for 35 to 45 years. They had seen Harlem in its Renaissance heyday, and all were active members of the local churches, their main sustenance in their old age. Their children had married and lived elsewhere. Some, like Susie Grier, took care of sickly relatives who were close to their own ages. Their apartments were as clean and as attractive as any I had ever seen, and they pointed with pride to the various certificates awarded them from Harlem organizations and churches over the years for their volunteer work. They had hope for Harlem's eventual emergence from the degradation into which it had plummeted, and they wanted it to be redeveloped. So they had not been opposed to the rehab project. They simply did not want to leave their apartments permanently and move into the hotels the city offered. They would have had to move out of Harlem, their home for so many years, and break ties with neighbors, friends, churches, and organizations that had been a solid part of their lives. Additionally, they feared that, despite Goler's letter promising to return them to their former buildings, once the project was completed, the rent would be too high for them to pay out of their small pensions and Social Security. And they did not believe that the promise would be kept. Those who had accepted the city's offers of relocation returned to tell horror stories of cramped single-occupancy hotel rooms in dangerous neighborhoods, of furniture damaged in transport to storage warehouses where other items had been stolen and long-cherished possessions lost. The tenants had offered an alternative plan to remain where they were in one of the last buildings scheduled for rehab and to be returned to the first one when it was completed. I also knew that the tenants' helpless situation was not their fault. They had incorporated their tenant organization and attempted to enter into an interim lease program with the city for the maintenance of the buildings, but the city refused their proposal. They had attempted to obtain legal help through the community law office and had not been helped. They were now left with only the certainty that the dignity of their lives was not to be ground into the dirt of indifference with their consent. And with each defeat, they became stronger. If relocation was inevitable, it would be a move into decent apartments. On March 171, met with Frederick Samuel, Miles Matthews from Representative Rangel's office, and officials of HPD. They urged me to communicate to the tenants that the survival of the project depended on their leaving the site. I did, and they refused. On March 18th, I tried a different legal approach and filed an Article 78 proceeding against the city's administrative bodies in the New York Supreme Court for an order canceling the forthwith vacate order and requiring the city to restore water and heat to the buildings, based on the illegalities that nullified the order. The city's response was that an Article 78 proceeding, which challenges city administrative decisions, must be brought against the city within 4 months of the action complained of. The ULURP illegalities occurred in August 1980, 7 months earlier. The forthwith vacate order, however, was within the time frame. And the petition set forth the fact that the vacate order was in violation of the Housing Maintenance Code because the city itself had disconnected the water without just cause and then used the resulting health hazard to justify its condemnation of the building as unsafe. The city further replied that the tenants were in no way harmed by any technical irregularities in ULURP. The city then made its final argument. If petitioner's tenants do not relocate immediately, Harlan houses will have to be abandoned, and where a party demands that the court exercise its equitable injunctive power, the court must weigh the relative harm that will be caused to the parties by the granting or denial of the injunction here. Of course, the harm to the city is enormous and irrevocable. A $12 million project that would provide rehabilitated housing for over 600 needy New Yorkers will be lost. An area of blight will threaten the security and integrity of a 15-block renewed neighborhood in Harlem. On April 10, 1981, Judge Louis Oken gave his decision. He refused to cancel the vacate order, and he ordered that all tenants leave their apartments by noon the following day. Duffy had given his decision from the bench without opinion, and Oken repeated the precedent on April 10th without addressing the issues raised in the petition or the legal argument presented in the lengthy memorandum I had submitted. Rather, it would appear that he did in fact respond to the letter sent to him by Karen Shatskin, Assistant Corporation Counsel for the city, mailed to him before the case was argued and dated April 1st, a reprehensible interference with legal process. In the letter, Shatskin stated, "Although I fully understand that it is not ordinary procedure to address a matter to your Honor's attention before it is submitted to you in special term Part 1, this matter is of such urgency that extraordinary measures are imperative. The $12 million rehabilitation project scheduled for the site that petitioners wrongfully occupy will have to be permanently abandoned if they do not vacate the buildings immediately. The delay that is normally incident to court proceedings can kill this project, in which event a victory for respondents on the merits will be an empty one indeed. I am therefore writing to bring to your Honor's attention the need for an expeditious determination of this matter. I am enclosing a set of papers submitted to date by both sides. I filed the appeal I had already prepared, called Ms. Grier, and told her the decision. She was not surprised and asked me to meet with the tenants that evening to explain the decision to them. They grouped together in her living room, the walls of which were covered with family photographs, and we talked. They were calm. They thanked Harlem Legal Services. And then they left to complete the packing they had already begun. As I took a cab home, I experienced burnout for the first time in my life. I was hollow, dissociated, and very tired. The next day, Saturday, was a rainy, cold day, and Ruth Whitted of the Harlem Interagency for the Aging, who had my home telephone number, called to tell me that the marshals had arrived and that she was facilitating the tenants' relocation to hotels. I had neither the heart nor the energy to go to the building. I sat home without moving, staring at the rain storming across the window panes, dry and inside an apartment I had called home for a very long time. And I suffered with them.
Be prepared to move. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Seemed like pretty much knew what was going to happen. Like, I've heard this before. Be prepared to move. Number to dial, 720-716-7300. The code, 564943, pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. I will say, man, this is the third different book that we have read, Katherine Massey Book Club, where the Atlanta child murders have been talked about, just showing what a significant event that was. Certain absolute madness, killings in Buffalo, Joey 22, and then a foot in each world. Leonida McClain, she wrote about that in the Chicago Tribune, black female journalist who took her own life later on, mental health, black people committing suicide. But she wrote, Leonida McClain, she wrote about the so-called Atlanta child murders, a case that we've talked about a lot here at the C.O.W.S. But this is at least the third time that that series of child murders has been mentioned in the Katherine Massey Book Club, and she actually had quite a bit to say, Evelyn Williams, about them coming up to New York and doing their march and stuff. It even reminded me, because she mentioned a gang, the great Tony Brown. They did an entire segment on Tony Brown's journal. And I think it might even be 2 parts. It is two parts. Is there a conspiracy against black people? And this is in like 1980, 1981, one or the other. And the main 2 components of this talk are the Atlanta child murders and the killings going on in Buffalo, which included 2 black males having that. But even those incidents, she told you, except for 2 black females, everybody on the list for the so-called Atlanta child murders were black males. And then in Buffalo, it was exclusively black males being killed, and some of them, their hearts being carved out of their chests. Remember? But those were the 2 main points for Tony Brown's journal. His TV segment, a little bit after Assata's escape, is there a conspiracy against black people I think he called it a conspiracy against black people in America. And I think it was 2 parts, and they did a whole segment on the Buffalo portion, and then they did a whole segment on the Atlanta child murders portion. That's another one. There was so much coverage of that case, and it continues. If you have connections to Atlanta, you should certainly be involved. And Muhammad Ali got involved, and like, woo, man. Anyway, let's see. Let me get the remainder of the email I started. Email number 1. So we left off. We were kind of close to the conclusion of chapter 18. Let's see. Mayor Koch closed the army. The victims lost all their possessions. Sadie Haynes, member of the suit, offered a solution: rehabilitate the building. We got that one. Okay. Number 6. The 17th black child murdered in Atlanta was the KKK responsible, the U.S. government, genetic manipulation. 1981, 5 more bodies organized a candlelight vigil. March 13th, 20,000 people walked in silent remembrance. 5 days were exhausting, heartened that they had become a part of Harlem history that I think its people will never forget. See the C.O.W.S broadcast regarding the text B list by the late Chet Dettlinger, racist suspect, first program back on the air in 2009. Mr. Dettlinger, we talked about the Atlanta child. I told you talked about that case many times over the years. Chapter 19. 1. No children allowed in the offices. The board intruded beyond their legal parameters, charged me with permitting the Black Panther Party to use the photocopying machine. Disrespect is to be expected in the workplace regardless of the non-white victim's credentials or abilities. Facts. 2. Susie Greer, attendant director of litigation, Ishmael Lahab. This was not a case for us. I filed the class action suit myself. I continue to have such respect for Miss Williams. Her altruism when it comes to non-white people is to be commended and emulated. Hear, hear. A number of folks have said that, and so many times, this is another one. She goes to the group, I'll do it by myself. That's so frequently is her against the whole army of white supremacy, racism, and fine, they're gonna throw me in jail or whatever I'm gonna do my darn man. 3. Simeon Goler, Black Secretary General, Roden Sanford, developer. Public notice be placed in city record in print so small no one reads the city record. Goler to obtain FHA mortgage. Buildings had to be vacant. March 1, 1980, the city discontinued heat, hot water, janitorial services. Elderly resisted relocation. Quality apartments to which they were invited by the city No refrigerators, stoves, toilets, rats, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Goler, victim, died in 2013 at the age of 84. He was born in South Carolina to a single teenage mother, was then adopted by the Goler family, moved to New York City as a child. He worked his way through NYU Law School as a toll clerk. He was a classmate at NYU of David Dinkins, future mayor. His favorite quote, according to his daughter, "A life well lived is a life of service." See the Bay State Banner obituary. Simeon Goler, former judge of Boston mayoral candidate, Charlotte Goler, Richie Max Cyril. This is from 2014. Racist white supremacists were very scientific in their methods in displacing the victims, including getting another victim, Mr. Goler, to facilitate things. Absolutely. I was thinking that as well, like the real estate industry doing all of this, like racial showcasing for sure. Like, hey, it's not racism. Mr. Goler, he's a black person. He was in the civil rights movement. What do you mean racist? That's not what this is at all. For this, the city accelerated its assault against the tenants. Capped main water lines. See, Israel has cut 70% of Gaza's water supply. Municipality memo, Middle East monitor. 5. Goler and city reeked of collusion. Clear constitutional violations. Racist white supremacists make it easy for victims to harm each other in a global system of racism, which is why Miss Williams' altruism is exceptional. 6. I visited the tenants in their apartments. They were so helpless. Old residents of Harlem, 35, 45 years. Once the project was completed, the rent would be too high. Congressman Charles Rangel, $12 million rehabilitation project. Congressman Rangel died this year at the age of 94. Wow. Very impressive. 7th longest elected U.S. congressman, first elected in 1971, defeating Adam Clayton Powell Jr., served in the U.S. Army. During the 1950s, Veterans Day, received a Purple Heart and Bronze Star for his service. Founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus, disliked by many, opposed the Iraq War, admirable, compared President George W. Bush to Bull Connor for his response during Hurricane Katrina. Wow. Later part of his congressional career, 2008 to 2010, he was mired in ethics violations, tax violations. Of course, they come from black people about those taxes, and was censored by the Congress. Ironically, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the congressman he replaced, was also mired in similar accusations of ethics violations and misappropriation of funds at the end of his congressional career. Let's see. That is as far as we got for this here week. We'll pick up the rest of it next week. Let's see. Let me get in a few of my notes. Make sure we didn't miss anybody. Hopefully, again, don't wait till the last minute if you have questions, thoughts to share. Let's see. Get a few of, as we're moving through, I'm curious, have any folks actually read books on COINTELPRO? Hopefully so. We've read a number at the cows, but like it should be, if you talk to black people, that they have a good library of books about COINTELPRO and detailing exactly what that whole program was about. Let's see, I think mid-portion of chapter 18. Okay. I so appreciated her discussion of the Atlanta child murders. Very popular case at the time period. They had the same theories that we talked about. KKK was this the Center for Disease Control, now under attack with firings and people literally shooting. But since the main branches in Atlanta, there were theories. Is this some sort of experiment to get genetic material from these young children? Was this some sort of sexual ring a la Jeffrey Epstein being liquidated? Lots of theories. We talked about that with Chet Datlinger, but he had a lot of the same theories in his book. Let's see. When they talked about the massive organizational support, which included the Black Women's Collective and the Nation of Islam and Local 420 and Harlem and Bellevue hospital workers and just on and on and on, particularly these, like what it seems like local black organizations, I'd be very curious to know 40 years on how many of them still exist. Like, it's so easy, or I'll say it's so difficult, as shown by all of the difficulties that Evelyn Williams has encountered. It is so challenging. It's so many deliberate, unnecessary obstacles in the system of white supremacy to non-white people trying to do anything constructive. And so these groups, this would be another illustration of four-wallism. You could, hey, if you have the time, how many of those groups still exist 2025? The ones that are, like I said, the black-run organizations. The Patrice Lumumba organization that they mentioned and the rest of are they still around? Did they get passed on and new generation is taking over and continuing their constructive counter-racist effort? I don't know. Let's see. Chapter 19. And of course, they do all of this great work and bring in these victims of the child murders, and they're able to raise money and get television programs and interviews so more people are aware of this case, which went on. This is, I think, like 1981 when all of this is happening. They didn't make an arrest in this case for another 3 years from the time period that they're talking about, unless I got my numbers discombobulated. I think this is 1981. Yep, this is 1981. They didn't do an arrest in this case until 1984. I had to go back double check to make sure, but it won't know. Oh, okay, this went on for a while. Like this went on for years, starting in 1979. Let's see. And of course, like as I said, the staff, they're not appreciative of this at all. Like she said, it was two, I think, black people on the staff. Like, oh wow, that's what the rest of them. Man. They just got more memorandums, and we don't have projects like this take on. The children come in. That's something that's still oh man, COVID, didn't they bring up child care? And oh my Lord, the cost of child care and blah, blah, blah. And might have to bring my child into work. And hey, some jobs, that's not possible. You got a factory job or Amazon. You can't bring your child into the Amazon warehouse. They'll stop you at the door. What does Junior do? Leroy Jr. can't be in here. Sit him out in the car. It's 100 degrees. Well, you can do something. You can't sit in here. White people don't care about children. Let's see. And she had staff members that resigned, and they put in a hiring freeze type of thing where white people set you up to fail. Let's see. She said that the attorneys went on their annual strike to get more money. No surprise that these people who seem like they would probably serve a lot of black people, victims of racism who are in poor housing, that they are super underpaid, like we don't want to incentivize this sort of work. And so they go on strike. And she said that David Abramson, a young white Vista volunteer who had been assigned to Harlem Legal Services by C.O.W.S. and whose stipend was paid from federal funds, joined me in landlord-tenant court, and every morning for the month it took to defend cases abandoned by the lawyers. Without David's tireless assistance, many families would have been summarily evicted. Now, if I'm getting this correctly, while the other lawyers were on strike, David was still being paid. He was still being paid because he was federally paid employee who would have been furloughed, I guess, the last 2 months or what have you. But he, still not out of the goodness of his heart, or I love black people so much, or, I came to do this work, but hey, I'm still being paid, so hey, I'm getting my nickels. And he's there, but man, now, if some of these black people were in a similar situation where they were still being paid correctly, they might have showed up to work too. But it's just that the system of white supremacy, there are a variety of, just investigate, because there will be a lot of situations like that where it'll be only white people show up in a constructive manner for something constructive, do some digging to investigate. Now, how did that happen? That's what white power looks like. Let's see. And so they let the Panther niggers use the photocopying machine. You expect any sort of allegation or charge. I guess they were talking about Assata Shakur, but I mean, dang, she was, at this point, are the Panthers defunct? Like, we're talking, like 1980, 1981? Like, she said they've been defunct since 1971, maybe a few years after that, but I mean, what? They just make up any old charge if you are classified. That's why the black O.J. Simpson, you done killed a white woman and a white man. Like, do what? How? When? What? Who saw me kill? What are you talking about? Let's see. all of the racial dislocation. We got lots of ways to get rid of you, and we'll even get a black person, put him in charge, so you can't say that we're being racist. But at the end of the day, you is out of here. Let's see. Oh, and then I highlighted, so David Abramson, so he's getting a federal check, so he still comes into work, and hey, for the people who needed the help, right on, because it could have been, just her by herself again. So right on for having the help. But so this time around, she said she discussed the matter. These clients, who about 200 people, older folks, victims, pitiful folks who are about to be thrown out. And she says, I discussed the matter with the director of litigation, Ishmael Lahab, who gave his predictable evaluation. Now, she doesn't identify if he's white or not. He gave his predictable evaluation. This was not a case for us. When I pressed him for a reason, he said he didn't think we should get involved. Which doesn't seem like a reason. Why? Why should we not get involved? I then asked the staff attorneys, unless that's just because I said so. I then asked the staff attorneys to work with me on the case. Now, is David Abramson in the group? Each one declined, stating that his or her caseload was too large to permit time for additional work. Man, what? I thought not all white peoples is racist. They didn't, I got my, quota of niggers that I can't help every nigger in Harlem. I mean, these are pitiful old, I already got enough pitiful old niggers. Can't take no more. Dang. Okay, these are the not racist white people. Okay. Let's see. And I mean, hey, now we've seen Evelyn Williams' effort as a black female, and she's much older now, closing in on 60, she says. You got some young, spry white folks with pep and vinegar. What? Come on. Let's see. They're violating their own code, but in the end, get on out of here. Be prepared to move. I always think that's truthful, important as well, to be honest with folks, so we're not lying and telling these folks, oh, no, we're going to figure it out, and you're not going to have to move. Like, hey, man, we can do, our best and try and go to court and fight this thing. And it might even be what she said, where, hey, we might have to take consolation in that we got you an extra 5 days. You could have been thrown out of here, on Monday. You got to enjoy Veterans Day, and you got a little bit more time to pack and all the rest and make arrangements. We got you fired. Like, hey, that's kind of still where things are, 2025. Let's see. And people who need the most help not getting help. That is so common. She said they had attempted to obtain legal help through the community law office and had not been helped. They were now left with only the certainty that the dignity of their lives was not to be ground into the dirt of indifference with their consent. Now, that is a metaphor, but I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Like, how much dignity do you have in a system of white supremacy racism? You can, come up with your own answers. Let's see. And then she's exhausted about all of this, and lots of, I mean, we've had this pop up several times, right? Like, black people, they go through all this and go to court and try and get evidence. Whites, nah, that's our property. Beat it. That's our lakefront property. This is our building, and we're going to get you new housing now. I'd even be seeing that. Are they going to follow through and get the new housing? Because I had the same suspicion, like they're just going to say that, throw you out in the street, and then, where's the new house? Beat it. Get out. Same thing, say, 2025, 1980, same thing. Any hoodles. That is chapter 19. We'll pick up next week, chapter 20. I suspect we'll get back to Assata Shakur and what's happening with all of that as well. But getting close to the end, we'll probably have have to even see, we might even wrap it up next week. We have to see. If we don't wrap it up next week, maximum 2 weeks, and we'll be all done with Inadmissible Evidence, Evelyn Williams. Again, if you're interested, the Amsterdam News, black newspaper, so-called, not that they would be above the influence of COINTELPRO, race soldiers, might be worth your time and energy to check out, see some of their many, many articles on Assata, even what some of the readers wrote in, and then what they published, pictures. You can see the sketch of the, I guess, what it was, a racist suspect white woman who I guess maybe some thought was not racist, who helped Assata escape, allegedly. You can see what the sketch of her looked like as well. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. If you're going to be accused of robbing a bank, I would want to be super sober when I get notice of those charges. Man. Like, either way, really, if you didn't do it, oh man, I need to be super sober. Like, what? The Brinks? What do you mean? Come on. Creator, we ask that you remind us, stop saying, not all white people are racist. Remind us, stop name-calling people classified as black. Stop producing throwaway offspring to be raped by Mary Kay Letourneau or drowned by Susan Smith, other white women. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in. Oh, sorry about that. I missed a hand. I didn't see 8420. Sorry. Was hiding back there. I call it 8420. Did you have a commentary on the text before we get ready to wrap up? Sorry, missed your hand. Didn't see you there.
All good, Gus. Greetings. Can I be heard?
Crystal.
Okay. I did want to say my commentary was from the first section. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. I'll try to be brief. I know it's at the end of the show. So, I never knew the details of Assata's escape from prison. So I did like to, hear that they gave some more information on that. I laughed about the white girl getaway driver. I gotta say that. Like that, I did get a good laugh out of that. Got a white girl driver, couldn't do it much cleaner. It kind of, so it's not the same, but it did put me in the mindset of Spook Who Sat by the Door. And when they had the black guy who was light-skinned, or I guess they called him a mulatto back then or whatever, and he got upset because I think Freeman wanted him to actually, head the heist and the bank robbery, because they wanted it to seem like it was some white people robbing the bank. And, it was like, hey, they got away pretty clean, got away pretty, real smooth, because everyone suspected white people and not black people. So it just kind of put me in that mind. It's not the same, because it's definitely, they said it was a white woman, Italian, I don't know what that means, but they said it was a white woman. So, I got to go with what they said. I do wonder why they did not go into the escape details in Assata's book. I always thought that, like they kind of skated over it. They never really went into the details. So I always wonder why. I did like that quote, "Run, Assata, run." So I'm torn. Like, it's like I'm happy she escaped from greater confinement, but I couldn't imagine living my like just living the remainder of my life in hiding and on the run. Oof. I don't know. It just made me reflect a little bit, made me think a little bit on that. I did, okay, I'm gonna say this. This is a statement. So for me, so far, good book. And when I say good book, I mean I think it's a constructive read. I did want to ask you, Gus, and I know we're about to wrap it up, but I did just want to ask real quick. Do you think it's a good book so far? Do you think it's a constructive read? And I'll leave it at that. I'll tune in next week and try to give some more commentary. So, thank you for catching my hand.
Thank you for your patience. My fault for cooning around on the switchboard. Didn't even see you there. Do I think it is a constructive book? Absolutely. Reason being, information about COINTELPRO, that would be enough to stop right there. But then I think it also gives a lot of great information about the system of white supremacy, racism, and many black people, Evelyn Williams certainly, and many others who attempted to counter racism. In terms of it being a so-called good book, not really sure what that means. We had questions about the term good. I certainly know there's no such thing as a good person. Generally my assessment or criterion around a quote-unquote good book is, does it have lots of constructive information to help me learn about the system of white supremacy, racism, and or other important subject matter? And so by that criterion, I would say, yeah, it's good book. Quite a bit to learn about COINTELPRO and the system of racism. In terms of just my quick theory on why Assata's book may have less information about her prison escape, her book was published in 1987. Evelyn Williams' book was published in 1993. So that, in 1987, if I'm Assata, it hasn't even been a decade since the escape, and powerful white people are still talking about kidnapping and killing her. I probably would not go into a lot of details about any of this. Now, Evelyn Williams, as an attorney, and even the details that she revealed, she just quoted from the newspaper. So she didn't, which is about all she could do because she wasn't there. But she just quoted from publicly available sources about, what allegedly happened during all of that, which is, easy enough, safe enough to do. But yeah, that's why that was my thought process. The same reason that she didn't talk to her aunt about, or tip her off in any way about what was to come. In terms of being on the run, and just think and she was in another so-called country, not just on the run. I don't know. I suspect they don't have tons of black people in Cuba. I've never been. They still have the system of white supremacy, from what I have been told. And the dominant language is not English. Now, if she knew Espanol before she got there, fine. Or if she can learn quickly, fine. But I mean, yeah, and she has a daughter. Man, how long does it take to get my daughter over here? And am I putting her at risk? And all the it would be quite a sacrifice. And to live with that, I played the segment, you got powerful, armed, white trained killers telling you, you better look over your shoulder for the rest of your life. And from what we've read in the book, if it's true, the rest of your family, your mother, aunties, cousins, everybody in your attempted family, they better look over their shoulder for the rest of their life. Yes, that is quite a lot to live with. Wow, especially if she didn't do no cop killing on the turnpike. Double yikes. Any hoodles. My bad if we missed any other hands. The switchboard is being good. Blame it on the switchboard. I was sitting there looking at it. It didn't look like it. Anyway, we'll do better next week. Much obliged. 8420. Thank you for your patience and commentary. Yes, I do think it is constructive. I would further think it's constructive because this is the sort of book that could end up on the banned book list that they don't prominently feature in the New Jersey public school system, Newark public school system, Middlesex County, New Jersey. Yes, I think it is constructive, and lots of New Jersey state, even the history that's omitted, North Carolina purge from this week. That is important to further emphasize why that should be talked about, because dang, there should have been at least a paragraph about all that in this here book. Any hoodles. Be back next week. Context of White Supremacy. Signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.